Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The Cursed Gold. I remember the day vividly, like a snapshot stuck in my mind, refusing to fade. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty construction site. My name is Alex, and I had spent the last few months managing a renovation project for an old historical building. Little did I know that this project would lead me down a path of terror and madness. It all began with a question, one that had lingered in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. What secrets lay buried beneath the crumbling foundation of this forgotten place? The workers and I had often joked about the potential treasures we might unearth, but none of us anticipated what we would actually find that day. As we dug deeper, the air grew heavy with an unsettling tension. My crew consisted of 4 others: Mike, the joker of the group; Sarah, the diligent one; Tom, the quiet observer; and Greg, the one always seeking adventure. They laughed and joked as the shovel hit something hard. At first, we thought it was just another stone, but as we cleared the dirt away, a glimmer caught my eye. "Hey, what's that?" I called out, my heart racing with excitement. Together, we unearthed an ornate chest, its surface covered in strange symbols and intricate carvings. It felt like a scene from an adventure movie, and for a moment, we were all caught up in the thrill of discovery. But as I wiped the grime from the chest's surface, a chill raced down my spine. The symbols seemed to pulse with a life of their own, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. "Open it," Mike urged, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. We gathered around, adrenaline coursing through us, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. I hesitated, a flicker of doubt clouding my mind. What if this was something better left undisturbed? But curiosity got the better of me. I pried the chest open, and what we found inside was beyond our wildest imagination. Gold coins, glistening jewels, and artifacts from a long-lost civilization. It was a fortune, a dream come true. But as I reached out to touch the gold, a voice in my mind screamed at me to stop. I pulled my hand back, glancing at my crew, their faces a mixture of awe and greed. "Can you believe it?" Sarah breathed, her eyes wide. But as I looked closer, I noticed something unsettling. The air around us shifted, charged with a palpable energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I could almost feel the whispers of the past, warning us to leave. Yet, the allure of wealth drowned out the fear. Mike was the first to reach in, fingers closing around a golden necklace. As soon as he touched it, his expression twisted, and he staggered back, eyes wide with terror. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart pounding. He gasped for breath, the laughter drained from his face. I can't think straight. It's like something's inside my head." A wave of panic washed over me. I glanced at the others, and their faces mirrored my horror. What had we awakened? "Maybe we should put it back," Tom suggested, his voice trembling. But the temptation was too strong. Greg, with a wild glint in his eye, reached for a handful of coins, his laugh echoing in the stillness. "Come on, it's just gold. What's the worst that could happen?" That was the moment the air thickened, as if the universe itself held its breath. I watched in horror as Greg's demeanor shifted, his laughter turning into an unsettling grin. It was as if the gold had wrapped around his mind like a serpent, squeezing tighter with every moment. We gathered our things, but I knew in my gut that the treasure we had unearthed was more than just gold. It was a curse, a whisper of madness waiting to consume us. As we left the site that day, a sense of dread settled in my chest. It was only the beginning, and the darkness that lay ahead was far more profound than we could have ever imagined. The next morning, I awoke with a heaviness in my chest, the weight of the previous day pressing down on me. I tried to shake off the lingering dread as I prepared for work, but the images of the gold chest haunted my thoughts. What had we truly uncovered? As I arrived at the site, I found my crew gathered around the hole we had dug the day before. The chest was still there, sitting ominously in the sunlight, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward us, beckoning us closer. Mike stood apart from the group, his face pale and drawn. He glanced at me, eyes filled with an unsettling mixture of fear and confusion. "Are you okay?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. He nodded, but the tremor in his hands told me otherwise. "Just didn't sleep well. Kept hearing things." I shared a glance with Sarah, who wore a frown, her brow furrowed with worry. "What do you mean, hearing things?" she asked. "It was like whispers," Mike replied, voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt like someone was right there. I shivered, recalling my own feelings from the day before. "Maybe it's just the stress of the job," I suggested, trying to dismiss the growing unease. "Let's just focus on getting this place finished." But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The whispers seemed to seep into the very fabric of our reality, and the closer we got to the treasure, the more we risked our sanity. Yet, as we stood there, the chest still loomed in our minds, its gold shining like a siren's call. "Let's just take a look," Tom said, his curiosity piqued despite the warning signs. He moved toward the chest, and without thinking, I followed him. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Mike, who shook his head vigorously. "Guys, I really don't think we should," Mike began, but I interrupted him. "Just for a moment," I said, trying to sound convincing. "We need to know what we're dealing with." As we leaned over the chest, I felt an electric pulse in the air, like the calm before a storm. I pushed the lid open further, revealing the gold coins glimmering in the sunlight. My heart raced as I reached in, fingers brushing against the cold metal. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the site, making us all jump back. I turned to see Greg standing by the pile of debris, his eyes wide with fright. "What was that?" he yelled, panic lacing his voice. "It's nothing," I assured him, but doubt crept into my mind. The atmosphere had shifted, and a heavy silence descended upon us, broken only by the sound of our breathing. "Let's just go back to work," Sarah suggested, but her voice trembled. "We shouldn't linger." We agreed, but the whispers persisted, taunting us from the depths of our minds. The rest of the day passed in a haze of unease, our laughter replaced by a tense silence. Each of us felt it, a growing awareness that something was terribly wrong. As night fell, I drove home, the roads familiar yet transformed by an ominous shadow. My phone buzzed with messages from Mike, each one more frantic than the last. "I can't shake this feeling," he wrote. "It's like I'm being watched." I tried to reassure him, but my own fears were bubbling to the surface. What if this treasure was more than just gold? What if it was a curse that would ensnare us all? Days turned into weeks, and the unease only deepened. I often caught myself staring into mirrors, half expecting to see a shadow lurking behind me. I felt the weight of the whispers grow heavier with each passing day. I could almost hear them, just out of reach, like a language lost to time. Our work began to falter. Mike quit, claiming he couldn't stand the thoughts that haunted him. Greg grew erratic, laughing at odd moments and mumbling to himself. Sarah and Tom tried to carry on, but the energy on site was different. It felt suffocating, as if the air itself was thick with despair. One night, I found myself unable to sleep, the walls of my home closing in around me. I got up and wandered outside, hoping the cool night air would clear my mind. That's when I saw her, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, shrouded in shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. She turned, and I saw her face, pale and hollow, eyes sunken deep into her skull. It was a face I didn't recognize, yet it felt oddly familiar, as if I had seen her in a dream. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "It's coming for you." I stumbled back, fear clawing at my throat. The whispers returned, louder now, drowning out my thoughts. I ran inside, locking the door behind me, desperate to escape the darkness that seemed to seep into every corner of my life. As I lay in bed, trembling, I knew deep down that whatever we had unearthed was just the beginning. The treasure was a beacon, drawing in the lost and the damned. And we were trapped, ensnared in a web of madness from which there would be no escape. The following days bled into each other, each moment heavy with the weight of our discovery. I tried to distract myself, burying my head in the mundane tasks of construction, but the echoes of that night haunted me. Each time I passed the chest, a sense of dread washed over me, as if it were alive and watching us. Tom and Sarah were the only ones who remained committed to the project, but even they couldn't shake off the creeping sense of doom. The construction site had transformed from a place of labor to a haunted ground. The walls of the old building felt as though they whispered secrets, warning us of the darkness we had unearthed. As we continued working, I found myself withdrawing more and more from my team. I became increasingly paranoid, convinced that something was watching me from the shadows. At night, I couldn't escape the feeling of being followed, the echoes of laughter from the chest ringing in my ears. One evening, Sarah approached me, her brow furrowed with concern. "You've been distant, Alex," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I snapped, though even I could hear the tremor in my voice. "Fine? You hardly sleep, and when you do, you scream in your sleep," she replied, crossing her arms. "We all feel it, you know. It's not just you." I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth hung heavy in the air between us. "Maybe we should leave the treasure alone," I finally said. "There's something wrong with it." Sarah shook her head. "You can't honestly believe that. We found something incredible. We could be rich. Rich or cursed." I countered, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "We need to put it back." She looked at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You really think that will change anything? We've disturbed it already. The damage is done." I sighed, my shoulders slumping under the weight of it all. I don't know what to believe anymore. As night fell, a storm rolled in, dark clouds blanketing the moonlight. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as I sat in my living room, trying to shake off the ominous feeling. I glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, shattering the uneasy silence. I jumped up, heart racing, and hurried to the door. The wind whipped through the trees, and I could barely see anything beyond my front porch. My breath caught in my throat when I noticed something moving at the edge of the woods. I squinted, trying to make sense of the shape that flickered in the darkness. It looked like a figure, but it was unlike anything I had seen before, twisted and contorted, as if caught between two worlds. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the door shut, locking it tight. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Meet me at the site. You need to see this." Against my better judgment, I grabbed my coat and headed out into the storm. The wind lashed against me as I made my way to the construction site, dread pooling in my stomach. I could feel the whispers growing louder in my mind, urging me to turn back, but curiosity drove me forward. When I arrived, I found Tom standing by the chest, rain pouring down around him. His eyes were wild, filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. "You have to see what I found," he exclaimed, pointing toward the open chest. Inside, the coins shimmered like they were alive, pulsating with an otherworldly glow. But it wasn't just the gold that caught my attention. There were artifacts scattered around the bottom, broken pieces of pottery, withered bones, and what looked like a small doll, its eyes eerily lifelike. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my heart racing. "They were just inside," he replied, almost too eagerly. "It's incredible, isn't it?" I shook my head, unease settling in my chest. "We shouldn't have opened it. We need to close it and leave it alone." Tom stepped closer, his eyes gleaming. "No. We can't just walk away. This is history, Alex. We need to study it to understand what it is." Before I could respond, a flash of lightning illuminated the area, and I caught a glimpse of something moving behind Tom, something dark and shifting, lurking just beyond the trees. My heart raced as I called out, "Tom, look out!" But before he could turn, a sudden gust of wind sent a wave of dirt and debris crashing into us, knocking him to the ground. I stumbled back, gasping for breath as the darkness closed in around us. "Get back!" I yelled, but it was too late. The air filled with a cacophony of whispers, swirling like a storm, drowning out my thoughts. The chest began to rattle violently, and I could see the gold coins clattering against one another as if they were alive, thrumming with a pulse of their own. I felt a surge of panic and fear. This was no ordinary treasure. "Alex!" Tom shouted, scrambling to his feet. "We need to leave." We turned to run, but as we did, I felt a cold grip on my arm, pulling me back. I screamed, adrenaline surging through my veins, but the grip tightened, sending chills down my spine. I turned to see the doll from the chest, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Run!" I shouted, breaking free from its grasp. We bolted toward the entrance of the site, hearts racing as the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. The storm raged around us, but all I could think about was escaping the darkness that threatened to consume us. Just as we reached the exit, I glanced back one last time, my breath hitching in my throat. The chest was gone, swallowed by the shadows, and in its place stood a figure, shrouded in darkness, eyes glowing like embers. "Help me," it whispered, voice chillingly familiar. With that, I stumbled forward, dragging Tom along with me as we escaped into the night, the darkness clawing at our heels. We ran until our lungs burned, the storm masking our panic breaths. The darkness clung to us, wrapping around our minds like a suffocating shroud. I could still hear that voice, echoing in my head. "Help me." The words haunted me, sending chills down my spine as we stumbled through the rain-soaked streets. Finally, we reached my car. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, desperate to escape. "Get in!" I shouted, my heart racing. Tom didn't need to be told twice. He slid into the passenger seat, breathless and wide-eyed. As I turned the ignition, The engine sputtered for a moment before roaring to life. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness behind us, but the road was empty, save for the flickering streetlights casting eerie shadows. "Did you see it?" Tom gasped, his voice shaky. "Did you see what was in the chest?" "I saw enough," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "We need to get away from that place. It's not safe." Tom nodded, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. "But what about the others?" "Sarah and Greg, they're still there." A wave of guilt washed over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had unleashed something terrible. "We can't go back. We need to warn them." "They have to leave," I said, my voice heavy with dread. The rain fell harder, hammering against the windshield as I drove through the empty streets. With every turn, I felt the weight of the darkness following us, whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. My thoughts drifted to the strange figure I had seen earlier, and I shivered at the memory. What had I invited into my life? When we reached the construction site, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, almost suffocating. I parked the car hastily and turned to Tom. "Stay close," I warned. "We need to find Sarah and Greg." As we stepped out into the rain, the air crackled with tension and the wind howled through the trees, sounding almost like a warning. I led the way, heart pounding in my chest as we approached the site. The building loomed before us, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the stormy sky. "Do you hear that?" Tom whispered, his eyes darting around. I strained to listen, and the sound hit me like a punch, a faint, melodic whispering echoed from within the walls, almost hypnotic. It was as if the building itself was alive, calling to us, begging us to enter. "Let's just check inside," I said, though my voice trembled. "We have to make sure they're okay." With each step toward the entrance, the whispers grew louder, wrapping around us like a thick fog. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior, shadows dancing along the walls. "Sarah?" I called, my voice echoing through the empty space. "Greg?" There was no response, only the sound of dripping water and the unsettling whispers that seemed to swirl around us. We stepped inside, the chill in the air biting at our skin. As we moved deeper into the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The air grew heavier, filled with a palpable dread. I glanced back at Tom, whose face was pale and drawn, eyes wide with fear. "Where could they be?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the hall. We exchanged glances, adrenaline surging through our veins. "We need to check it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We crept forward, the whispers swirling around us, urging us to turn back. The deeper we went, the more disoriented I felt. Shadows seemed to twist and turn, taunting us as we reached a large room at the end of the hall. The door stood ajar, and I pushed it open cautiously. What I saw made my blood run cold. Sarah stood in the center of the room, her back to us, staring blankly at the wall. Greg was hunched over on the floor, surrounded by scattered coins and artifacts from the chest. The air crackled with tension as I stepped inside, dread pooling in my stomach. "Sarah?" I called, but she didn't move. "Greg!" Tom shouted, rushing forward. "What's happening?" As if snapped from a trance, Sarah turned slowly, her eyes empty and hollow. "You shouldn't have come back," she murmured, her voice devoid of emotion. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. Greg looked up, his face twisted in a mixture of terror and ecstasy. "It's beautiful," he whispered, eyes wide with a feverish glow. "You don't understand. It's all connected." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my heart racing. "We need to leave now." But as I stepped forward, I felt a sudden force push me back. I stumbled, hitting the ground hard. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and the air thickened around us, suffocating me. "Help me!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking. "It won't let us go." I struggled to my feet, panic gripping my chest. Tom and I moved to pull Sarah away from whatever was binding her, but it was like trying to break through a wall of fog. I could feel the darkness closing in, tendrils reaching out to ensnare us. "Run!" I shouted to Tom. "We have to get out of here." But as we turned to escape, a shadow darted across the room, blocking our path. It was the figure I had seen earlier, distorted and writhing, eyes glowing like burning coals. "Stay with me," it whispered, voice dripping with malice. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts as I felt the pull of the darkness. My vision blurred, and panic surged through me. I reached for Tom, desperate to escape, but the figure lunged at us, darkness enveloping the room. "Alex!" Tom screamed, and just like that, everything went black. When consciousness returned, it was slow and painful, like clawing my way up from the depths of a nightmare. My head throbbed, and I struggled to open my eyes. I was lying on a cold, hard surface, the air thick and heavy with an oppressive silence. "Tom?" I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. Panic surged through me as I pushed myself up, scanning the dimly lit room. Shadows flickered along the walls, and I could feel a chill creeping down my spine. "Tom!" I shouted, louder this time. The sound echoed around me, swallowed by the darkness. I forced myself to stand, swaying slightly as I regained my balance. My surroundings were unrecognizable, a cavernous space, dimly illuminated by a flickering light that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The air was damp, and I could smell the earthy scent of decay. "Sarah!" I called out, fear tightening around my chest. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread as I took in the disarray surrounding me, broken furniture, shards of glass, and the remnants of what once was a living space. I stepped forward cautiously, heart racing as I moved deeper into the darkness. The oppressive silence was maddening, and every creak of the floorboards sent my pulse racing. I could still hear the distant whispers, echoing in my mind, weaving their way through my thoughts. As I ventured further, I spotted something glinting in the corner, a shard of metal. I crouched down to inspect it and realized it was a piece of the chest. My heart sank. It had shattered. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound from behind me. I whipped around, breath catching in my throat. "Tom? Is that you?" But there was no response, only the shadows closing in around me. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I turned just in time to see a figure darting into the darkness. I felt a surge of fear and instinctively took a step back, but I stumbled and fell to the ground. "Get a grip, Alex," I muttered to myself, forcing my trembling hands to steady. "You need to find Tom and Sarah." I stood up and scanned the room again, focusing on the shadows that seemed to twist and contort, hiding secrets I couldn't fathom. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that clawed at my sanity. "Help us," one voice called, echoing from the depths of my mind. "Join us." "No," I shouted, shaking my head. "I won't be a part of this." The ground beneath me trembled, and the walls seemed to close in. I could feel a presence lurking, watching me from the shadows. I had to escape. As I stumbled toward the only exit I could see, a doorway shrouded in darkness, I felt a sudden surge of energy wash over me, a wave of dread that made my skin crawl. I hesitated, glancing back at the room. Was I truly alone? Gathering my courage, I stepped into the doorway, feeling the cold air wash over me like a wave. I found myself in a narrow corridor, dimly lit by flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The walls were damp and covered in a layer of grime that clung to the air. I pressed on, calling out for Tom and Sarah, but my voice only echoed back at me. With each step, I felt the shadows growing thicker, closing in around me, wrapping around my mind like a vice. The whispers were relentless, growing louder, more insistent. "Help us, Alex. Join us." Panic surged through me as I stumbled down the corridor, desperately seeking a way out. The air felt heavier with each passing moment, and I could hear something slithering in the darkness behind me, a presence that sent chills racing down my spine. Suddenly, I turned a corner and found myself in another room, this one larger and filled with broken remnants of what appeared to be old furniture. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with strange artifacts that glimmered in the dim light. My eyes were drawn to a large mirror hanging crookedly on one wall. As I approached the mirror, I felt a strange pull, as if it were calling to me. I looked into the glass, but what stared back was not my reflection. Instead, I saw flickering images, a vision of the chest, the coins spilling out like a flood, and then faces. Their expressions were twisted in anguish, mouths moving in silent screams. I stumbled back, heart racing as I realized they were the souls of those who had touched the cursed gold, trapped forever within the mirror. "No!" I gasped, staggering away. The whispers grew louder, filling my head with the promises of power, wealth, and a life beyond what I could comprehend. "Join us," they urged, a chorus of voices urging me to step closer. "You can't escape." I shook my head, fighting against the pull. "I won't," I shouted, turning away from the mirror. "I won't become one of you." As I turned to flee, I heard a voice call my name, a familiar voice that sliced through the chaos. "Alex. Help me. Sarah." I cried out, adrenaline surging through my veins. I sprinted down the corridor, following the sound of her voice, my heart racing with determination. I burst into another room, and there she was, trapped, bound by some dark force, her eyes wide with fear. She looked at me, desperate and pleading. "Get me out of here," she screamed, struggling against the invisible chains that bound her. "What happened?" I gasped, rushing to her side. "Where's Tom?" "I don't know," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "He was here, but then, something took him." "No!" I shouted, panic clawing at my throat. "We have to find him." But before I could react, the shadows around us began to shift and swirl, coalescing into a dark form. The figure materialized before us, eyes glowing like fire, a twisted smile spreading across its face. "You cannot escape," it hissed, voice like ice. "You are mine now." I felt a surge of terror as the shadows closed in, enveloping us both. "No!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand. "We can't give in. We have to fight." Together, we pushed against the darkness, fighting to break free from the grip that threatened to consume us. But the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, wrapping around us like a noose. "Join us, join us." In that moment, I realized we were trapped, caught in a web of darkness spun from the gold we had disturbed. The weight of our decisions pressed down on me, and I felt a glimmer of hope slip away as the shadows tightened their grip. But just as despair began to take hold, I remembered the coin I had pocketed the day we discovered the chest, the very same gold that had begun this nightmare. With a burst of determination, I reached into my pocket, pulling it out and holding it high. "Get away from us!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the whispers. The shadows recoiled, hissing as the light from the coin illuminated the darkness. Sarah stared at me, hope flickering in her eyes. "Do it, Alex," she urged, voice filled with urgency. "Use it." I stepped forward, my heart racing, and thrust the coin toward the darkness. "I refuse to be part of this curse. We are not yours." The shadows writhed, hissing in pain as the light from the coin pushed back against the darkness. The figure screamed, its form twisting and contorting as the shadows began to unravel. "No," it howled, voice filled with rage. "You cannot escape." With one final surge of power, I thrust the coin deeper into the darkness, feeling the energy coursing through me. The shadows screamed in agony as they dissolved into nothingness, the whispers fading away. And just like that, the oppressive weight lifted, leaving only silence in its wake. As the last remnants of the shadows dissipated, I felt the warmth of the light surrounding us. The air shifted, and for a moment it felt like we were emerging from a nightmare. The burden of darkness lifted. I turned to Sarah, breathless and shaking. "Are you okay?" "I think so," she replied, her voice trembling as she took in our surroundings. The room was now illuminated, the artifact shimmering with a faint glow, the oppressive feeling that had suffocated us now gone. "What about Tom?" I swallowed hard, the panic rising again as I remembered our friend. "We need to find him," I said, determination flooding back. "He's still in danger." "Where do we start?" Sarah asked, glancing around the room, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. I thought for a moment, the memory of Tom's last moments rushing back to me. "We need to retrace our steps. He was last with us before everything went dark," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "Let's head back to the entrance and see if we can find a way to call for help." We moved cautiously through the halls, the flickering light guiding our path. The eerie atmosphere that had once clung to us began to dissipate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't truly free yet. The whispers still lingered at the edges of my mind, reminding me of what we had uncovered. "Alex," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. What if he's not okay?" I looked at her, fear clawing at my chest. "We can't think like that. We have to believe he's safe." As we approached the doorway we had come through, a sudden chill rushed over me, freezing me in my tracks. "Wait," I said, holding a hand up. "Did you hear that?" A faint sound echoed from the corridor, like a soft rustling, followed by a low groan. I strained to listen, dread pooling in my stomach. "Tom?" I called out, hoping against hope that it was him. "Are you there?" The rustling grew louder, and I saw a shadow flicker at the far end of the corridor. "Alex," a voice called, hoarse and strained. "Tom," I shouted, rushing toward the sound. As I turned the corner, I spotted him, hunched over on the floor, covered in grime and dirt. Relief surged through me, but it quickly turned to panic as I noticed the vacant look in his eyes. "Tom." I knelt beside him, shaking his shoulders gently. "Are you all right? What happened?" He looked up at me, confusion etched on his face. I don't know," he stammered, his voice trembling. There was this thing. It was everywhere, and then it took me. Sarah knelt beside me, her eyes wide with concern. "We thought we lost you," she exclaimed, relief flooding her voice. "You have to come with us. We need to get out of here." Tom's gaze flickered to the shadows behind us, fear creeping back into his eyes. "No, we can't go that way. It's watching us." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "I could feel it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was in my mind. It wanted me to join it, to stay." The gravity of his words settled over us, a heavy shroud of dread. "We need to move," I urged, pulling him to his feet. "Whatever is in here can't follow us if we stick together." With a nod, Tom steadied himself and we formed a tight group, inching our way back toward the entrance. As we walked, I felt the shadows shift, as if they were alive and moving with us, waiting for an opportunity to strike. "Don't look back," I warned, glancing at Sarah and Tom, their faces drawn with fear. "Just keep moving. We'll find a way out." But as we navigated the corridor, the whispers intensified, echoing through the air like a haunting melody. I felt the chill of dread creeping up my spine, the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled, and the walls began to close in. "Run!" I shouted, adrenaline surging as I pushed Tom and Sarah forward. We sprinted down the corridor, the darkness clawing our heels. The whispers morphed into anguished cries, swirling around us like a storm. I glanced back, and my heart sank at the sight of the shadowy figure emerging from the depths, its glowing eyes locked onto us. "Faster!" I yelled, panic coursing through my veins as we barreled toward the exit. The figure was gaining on us, tendrils of darkness reaching out, clawing at the air. We burst through the doorway and into the outside world, the rain still pouring down, washing away the remnants of the nightmare behind us. I gasped for air, heart racing as I turned to see if the darkness had followed us. But the shadows receded, the figure lingering just beyond the threshold, its form dissolving into the night. I could still hear the whispers, but they were fading, becoming distant echoes in the storm. "We made it," Sarah panted, relief flooding her voice as she clutched my arm tightly. "What about the chest?" Tom asked, glancing back toward the building, fear still etched in his features. "What if it comes back?" "We can't worry about that now," I replied, breathing heavily. "We need to find help." Together, we stumbled away from the site, the rain soaking through our clothes. The storm raged around us, but it felt different now, as if the darkness had been pushed back. We had escaped, for now. As we reached the edge of the site, a shiver ran down my spine. I looked back at the building, feeling a strange connection pulling me back, a whisper promising that this wasn't over. But I shook my head, determined to resist. Whatever darkness lurked within those walls was not mine to claim. "Let's go home," I said quietly, turning away from the haunting memories that would forever be etched in my mind. But even as we made our way down the rain-soaked road, I couldn't shake the feeling that the curse of the gold had not been broken, that it would forever haunt us, lingering just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The night was dark, and the rain pelted down in relentless sheets as we trudged down the empty road, the weight of what we had just escaped clinging to us like a heavy fog. Each step felt like a victory against the shadows that had threatened to consume us, yet doubt gnawed at my mind. "Do you think it's really over?" Tom asked, his voice breaking the suffocating silence. "I don't know," I admitted, glancing at Sarah. "But we have to keep moving. We can't let it follow us." The streetlights flickered above, casting weak pools of light on the asphalt. I could feel the storm swirling around us, a reflection of the turmoil within. The whispers still echoed in my mind, haunting me with their promises and threats. Maybe we should go to the police, Sarah suggested, shivering from the cold. Tell them what happened. I shook my head. They won't believe us. They'll think we're crazy. The last thing we needed was to be labeled as delusional. No one would understand the darkness we had faced. Then what do we do? Tom asked, his eyes darting nervously. We find a place to stay, somewhere safe, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We can figure this out together. As we made our way into town, the rain began to lighten, but the oppressive feeling in my chest refused to lift. The streets were deserted, the usual sounds of life silenced as if the world itself was holding its breath. Eventually, we found a small diner still open, its neon sign flickering in the dark. The warmth of the lights spilled onto the sidewalk, a beacon of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. Let's go in, I said, leading the way through the door. The bell chimed above us as we entered, and the familiar smell of coffee and greasy food enveloped us. A few patrons glanced our way, but most were too engrossed in their meals to pay us any mind. We slid into a booth in the corner, the vinyl seats sticky beneath us. Coffee? The waitress asked, her eyes scanning our disheveled appearances. Please, I replied, my voice shaky. And some food if you have it. She nodded and disappeared into the back, leaving us alone to process what had happened. Do you think we should tell someone? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with concern. About the treasure, about the darkness? Not yet, I replied firmly. We need to figure out what we're dealing with first. If we can't explain it to ourselves, how can we explain it to anyone else? The waitress returned with steaming mugs and a plate of fries. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. As I sipped the bitter coffee, a sense of normalcy washed over me, but it was short-lived. I can't shake this feeling, Tom said, staring into his cup. Like it's still watching us. Me too, I confessed, glancing around the diner, half expecting to see shadows lurking in the corners. But we have to focus. We can't let fear control us. We eat in silence, the only sounds the clinking of cutlery and the hum of conversation around us. I couldn't help but feel that the darkness we had escaped still loomed over us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As we finished our meal, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of movement outside the window. I turned, heart racing, but saw nothing. Just the empty street, glistening from the rain. I'm going to check my phone, I said, feeling an urge to reach out for some connection to the outside world. I fished it out of my pocket and stared at the screen. No messages, no missed calls. I had expected that. Still nothing? Sarah asked, concern etched on her face. No, I sighed, putting the phone away. It's like we're cut off from everything. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the diner, followed by a commotion. We all turned to look, eyes wide. A group of patrons had risen from their seats, shouting and pointing toward the kitchen. What's happening? Tom asked, his voice tense. I don't know, I said, fear creeping back into my gut. The waitress rushed out from the kitchen, panic etched across her face. Everyone stay calm, she shouted. We're just having some technical difficulties. But it was clear that something was wrong. The lights flickered, and I felt a chill sweep through the diner, as if the darkness had seeped in through the walls. Let's get out of here, I urged, standing up. But before we could move, the door swung open and a figure staggered in, wild-eyed and disheveled. "Help!" he screamed, panic lacing his voice. "It's coming for me." The room froze, all eyes on him. The man was drenched, hair matted to his forehead, and his breath came in quick gasps. "Who's coming?" I asked, heart racing. He stumbled forward, almost collapsing at our feet. "The shadows. They're real. They'll take you." Panic erupted in the diner, and I felt a surge of dread course through me. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing in my mind. "No, not again," I whispered, feeling the shadows creeping closer. "Get him out," someone shouted, and chaos ensued as patrons scrambled for the exits. "Stay calm," I yelled, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. But it was too late. The shadows surged into the diner, dark tendrils slithering across the floor and wrapping around the terrified patrons. The man on the ground screamed, a sound filled with pure terror. "Help me," he cried, eyes wide with fear. "Run," I shouted, grabbing Sarah and Tom by the arms. We pushed through the crowd, fear propelling us forward. The darkness wrapped around us, the whispers merging into a chorus of despair. As we burst through the door and into the rain-soaked street, I glanced back to see the shadows swallowing the diner whole, the screams of the patrons echoing in the night. "What do we do?" Sarah shouted, panic rising in her voice. "We need to find somewhere safe," I replied, heart pounding. But where could we go? The shadows were everywhere, waiting to claim us. "Over here," Tom shouted, pointing toward a nearby alleyway. We sprinted into the darkness, rain drenching us as we pressed against the cold brick walls. The whispers followed us, relentless, urging us to succumb to the darkness. "Keep moving," I urged, pushing us deeper into the alley. As we turned a corner, the shadows danced at the edge of our vision, teasing us with their presence. I could feel their pull, the weight of their darkness threatening to drag us down. "We can't let them get us," Tom gasped, his face pale. "I know," I replied, desperation rising in my throat. Suddenly, a bright light flickered ahead, cutting through the darkness. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. "There," Sarah pointed, hope igniting in her eyes. "A light." We raced toward it, relief flooding my chest as we approached a small, dimly lit doorway at the end of the alley. It looked like an entrance to an old building, its light beckoning us with a sense of safety. "Let's go," I shouted, pushing the door open. We stumbled inside, slamming the door behind us. The light was faint, but it illuminated the room enough for us to see the remnants of an old workshop, tools scattered across a dusty table, and shelves lined with strange artifacts. "Is this safe?" Tom asked, glancing nervously at the door. "I don't know," I admitted, but it felt better than being out in the open. "We'll have to wait here until it passes." We caught our breath, listening to the sounds outside. The rain had intensified, the darkness creeping closer to our sanctuary. But within these walls, we were momentarily shielded. "We can't stay here forever," Sarah said quietly, her eyes scanning the room. "I know," I replied, rubbing my temples. The weight of the night pressed down on me, and I felt the exhaustion settle in my bones. Suddenly, something caught my eye, a glint of metal on the table. I moved closer, heart racing as I reached for it. It was a small dagger, its blade shimmering in the dim light. "Where did this come from?" I muttered, turning it over in my hands. "Do you think it's safe?" Tom asked, his voice tense. I don't know, I said, but it might help us if we need to fight. Sarah nodded, her expression determined. We can't let it take us. We have to fight back. I took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. We'll find a way to end this, I said firmly. Together. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still out there, watching, waiting for its chance to strike. The echoes of the past lingered in the air, and I knew we had to face the shadows before they consumed us entirely. The air in the workshop felt charged, as if the very walls held their breath, waiting for what was to come. I gripped the dagger tightly, its cold metal grounding me amidst the chaos swirling in my mind. We need a plan, I said, glancing between Sarah and Tom. If the shadows come for us, we need to be ready. Sarah nodded, her expression steely. We have to find a way to destroy whatever is keeping them here. That chest, it has to be the source. Right, Tom said, still breathing heavily. But how do we even get back to it without getting caught? We'll have to be quick, I replied. We know the way now, but we need to stay alert. If the darkness is still lingering, it will be waiting for us to slip up. As we prepared to leave the safety of the workshop, a sudden gust of wind rattled the door, sending chills down my spine. The whispers had returned, louder this time, echoing with a sinister intent. Are you ready? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ready as we'll ever be, Sarah replied, determination glinting in her eyes. I pushed the door open, the rain still pouring outside, and we stepped into the night. The darkness felt alive, wrapping around us as we moved cautiously down the alleyway. Each step echoed with the weight of dread, the whispers urging us to turn back. Keep moving, I said, glancing back toward the alley entrance. We can't let it distract us. As we approached the site, the shadows swirled in the corners of my vision, taunting us, urging us to give in to the fear. I tightened my grip on the dagger, steeling myself against the overwhelming sense of dread. We made our way back to the building, the weight of what awaited us heavy in the air. The front door stood slightly ajar, and I pushed it open with a creak, revealing the darkened interior. Stay close, I whispered, leading the way into the room where we had discovered the chest. As we entered, the atmosphere shifted, an unsettling energy pulsing around us. The chest sat in the center of the room, its surface shimmering ominously in the dim light. Is it just me, or does it look different? Tom asked, his voice trembling. It does, I replied, stepping closer. The gold glinted in the shadows, a siren's call that sent chills down my spine. We have to destroy it. Ow! Sarah asked, her voice strained with fear. I glanced around the room, searching for anything that could help. If we can use the dagger somehow, maybe we can break the curse. I moved closer to the chest, the whispers growing louder, clawing at my mind. No, don't touch it, they warned, echoing through my thoughts. Alex. Sarah hissed, grabbing my arm. Be careful. Stay back, I said, heart racing. I could feel the darkness swirling around me, pressing in from all sides, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the fear. With trembling hands, I lifted the dagger, feeling its weight, its potential. Whatever it takes, I murmured, and plunged the blade into the chest. A burst of energy erupted from the chest, blinding light filling the room as a powerful shockwave surged through me. I staggered back, the whispers turning into screams of anguish echoing in my ears. The shadows writhed, swirling violently as if trying to escape the light. No! I yelled, forcing myself to remain focused. We have to keep going. Tom and Sarah watched in horror as the shadows writhed, the chest beginning to crack under the pressure. We can't stop now, Sarah shouted, her voice filled with urgency. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pressed the dagger deeper into the chest, feeling the resistance give way. The light blazed brighter, illuminating the room as the darkness shrieked and writhed in agony. And then, with a deafening crack, the chest shattered, shards of wood and gold flying in every direction. The force of the explosion knocked me to the ground, and I shielded my face with my arms. The darkness erupted in a final wail, the shadows dissolving into thin air as the light engulfed everything. I lay there, stunned, heart pounding, the world around me a blur. When the light faded, I opened my eyes slowly. The room was quiet now, the shadows gone, the whispers silenced. Tom and Sarah were kneeling beside me, their faces etched with concern. "Are you okay?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. "I think so," I replied, still trying to process what had just happened. We got to our feet, taking in the destruction around us, the remnants of the chest scattered across the floor, glimmering gold mixing with the dust and debris. "It's over," Sarah breathed, relief flooding her voice. But even as we stood there, I felt a lingering sense of dread. The echoes of what had happened still resonated in my mind. "Is it really over?" I whispered, glancing around. "I don't know," Tom admitted, his voice shaky. "But we have to leave this place. Now." We stumbled out of the building, stepping into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, and the clouds began to part, revealing a sky dotted with stars. "Look," Sarah said, pointing up. "It's beautiful." For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we had broken the curse. Maybe we were finally free. But as we walked away from this sight, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness would always be a part of me, lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting for a moment of weakness. We made our way down the road, the night air refreshing against my skin. We were alive, we had survived, but the weight of what we had encountered would linger. As we reached the edge of town, I looked back one last time at the building, its windows dark, the whispers finally silenced. But I knew that the echoes of that night would haunt us forever, a reminder of the darkness that lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. And though we had escaped, I could feel the shadows still lurking, whispering in the wind, reminding me that some curses are never truly broken. A call from the void. I never thought a simple phone call could turn my life upside down. It was just an ordinary Tuesday morning when my world shifted, ushering in a wave of confusion and dread. I had just finished my routine cup of coffee and was contemplating whether to go for a walk or bury myself in the latest novel I'd been meaning to read. The sun streamed through my kitchen window, casting warm, golden rays across the table, a comforting sight that I took for granted. But everything changed with that one call. My phone buzzed on the counter, jolting me from my thoughts. The number was unfamiliar, but curiosity got the better of me. I swiped to answer, expecting a telemarketer or perhaps a wrong number. Instead, a chilling voice filled the air. It was barely above a whisper, almost drowned out by the static. "You need to get out. They're coming for you." I froze, a chill running down my spine. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The line crackled, and the voice persisted, insistent yet eerily calm. "They know where you are. You have to run." The words echoed in my mind long after the call ended, leaving me shaken and breathless. I glanced at the clock, only a few minutes had passed since I answered. Dismissing it as a prank, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease creeping into my thoughts. After all, it was probably just some twisted joke. But as the day wore on, I couldn't help but replay the conversation in my head. Who was coming for me? Why should I run? With each passing hour, the mundane sounds of my apartment transformed into a sinister backdrop. The creaking of the floorboards became footsteps, the rustling of leaves outside morphed into whispers, and every sudden noise sent my heart racing. By the time evening settled in, my mind was a whirlwind of anxiety. I paced my small living room, the walls seeming to close in around me. Shadows danced in the corners, growing larger and darker as the light faded. It felt as if the world outside was holding its breath, waiting for something dreadful to unfold. I forced myself to turn on the television, seeking distraction, but nothing could drown out the gnawing fear that had taken root in my gut. As I sank into the worn couch, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. My eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of confusion and terror. The unsettling voice echoed in my ears, urging me to flee from an unseen danger. It was irrational, I told myself. There was no threat, just a mind playing tricks. But deep down, the instinct to heed the warning grew stronger, gnawing at my thoughts. As night fell, I found myself staring at the phone, half expecting it to ring again. Every silence felt charged, as if something was lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike. Finally, I decided to call a friend. Maybe sharing my experience would dispel the weight pressing down on me. I dialed her number, my heart racing with anticipation. But just as the call connected, my phone went dead, no ringing, no buzzing, just silence. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried restarting the device, but it wouldn't respond. In that moment, I understood something profound. The voice had been right. I was not safe. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and keys, my pulse quickening as I stepped into the cool night air. I was driven by a desperate need to escape, to put distance between myself and whatever unseen force was closing in. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting a dim glow on the empty road. With every step I took, the voices in my head grew louder. Run. You have to run. The words urged me forward, propelling me into the night, where shadows whispered secrets I could not comprehend. I walked quickly, my mind racing with fragmented thoughts. The streets felt unfamiliar in the darkness, each shadow a potential threat. I glanced behind me, half expecting someone to be following, but there was only the faint sound of my footsteps echoing against the pavement. The city was unusually quiet at this hour, with only a few cars occasionally passing by. I ducked into a nearby park, hoping to find some solace in the open space, but the trees loomed overhead like towering sentinels, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the starless sky. I leaned against a cold metal bench, attempting to catch my breath. Suddenly, my phone buzzed to life in my pocket, vibrating against my thigh. A rush of adrenaline surged through me. I pulled it out, hoping for some semblance of normalcy, but the screen displayed a series of missed calls, unknown numbers, all from the same hour. My heart sank. I tapped on the first one, desperate for clarity. But instead of a voice, I was greeted by silence, the kind that pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. I glanced around, feeling exposed in the park's dim light. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. I need to get home, I muttered to myself, trying to shake the dread clawing at my insides. I turned to leave, but just then, a rustling noise came from the bushes nearby, stopping me in my tracks. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. My heart raced as I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to flee. But before I could turn, I heard it, a soft whisper, indistinct but haunting. "Run, don't look back." The words sent a jolt of fear through me, and I sprinted back to the street, the world blurring around me as I ran. I was a fool for not taking the warning seriously. I had to find safety, a sanctuary from whatever was out there. The thought of returning home felt like inviting danger back into my life. I found myself in front of a nearby convenience store, its flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow. I pushed the door open, the chime ringing like a warning bell. Inside, the familiar sense of stale coffee and snack food enveloped me, but they did little to calm my nerves. The clerk behind the counter glanced up, surprise evident in his eyes at my disheveled appearance. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Just give me a moment," I stammered, rushing to the back of the store. I needed to collect my thoughts. I could feel the tension in the air, as if something sinister was lurking just beyond the glass doors. I grabbed a bottle of water and some chips, but as I turned to head back to the counter, a familiar voice echoed in my mind, louder than before. "You have to go. Now." The sense of urgency was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. I dashed to the register, slamming the items down. "I need to use your phone," I blurted out, desperation lacing my words. The clerk hesitated, glancing at the phone behind him. "Sure, but..." "No time. Please." I interrupted, my voice rising in panic. He nodded, handing it over reluctantly. I quickly dialed my friend's number again, praying for her to answer. But after a few rings, all I got was voicemail. I cursed under my breath and hung up, frustration boiling inside me. "Are you all right?" the clerk asked, his brow furrowing deeper. "Not really. I think someone is after me," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Before he could respond, my phone buzzed again, a notification that sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the screen and saw a new message from an unknown number. "You can't hide from us." I felt the walls closing in. "I need to go," I told the clerk, clutching the phone tightly. I bolted for the door, fear propelling me forward. "Wait," he called after me, but I didn't stop. I burst into the night air, the cool breeze doing little to soothe my racing heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that the voices were no longer just whispers in my head but something far more tangible. I stumbled onto the sidewalk, my thoughts spiraling. My mind raced as I considered my options. I could try to go home, but that felt like a death sentence. Instead, I headed for the bus stop, hoping to put some distance between myself and whatever danger was closing in. As I waited, the streetlights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced around me. I checked my phone repeatedly, each time expecting a new message or call, but it remained silent. Anxiety gnawed at me, a hungry beast that wouldn't let go. Finally, a bus pulled up, and I climbed aboard, feeling the weight of my decision settle in. I found a seat near the back and sat down, forcing myself to breathe slowly. The bus lurched forward, and I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone, or something, following me. But the streets remained empty, the familiar buildings passing by in a blur. I forced my eyes shut, trying to block out the voices that screamed for me to escape. Hours passed in agonizing silence as the bus made its way through the city. I struggled to hold onto my sanity, wondering if I was truly losing it. Had I imagined the call? The whispers? As I fought against the overwhelming fear, I couldn't shake the feeling that the threat was far from over. When I finally disembarked, it was well past midnight. The streets were deserted, the shadows longer and more foreboding than before. I had to find somewhere safe, but where? My heart raced as I considered my options. Then I remembered an old friend who lived nearby. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but desperation drove me to dial her number once again, hoping for a miracle. The phone rang, each tone amplifying my fear. "Please answer," I whispered, the anticipation gnawing at my nerves. Finally, a voice on the other end broke through the silence. "Hello? Rachel. It's me. Is everything okay?" she interrupted, her tone shifting to concern. "You sound panicked. Can I come over?" "I need help," I pleaded, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Of course. Just be careful," she said, and I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. As I made my way to her apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every sound, every shadow set my heart racing. I had to find safety, to escape whatever had been unleashed. Little did I know that the true horror was only just beginning. Rachel's apartment was just a few blocks away, but it felt like an eternity as I hurried through the dimly lit streets. My pulse raced with each step, the weight of my fears pressing down harder with every heartbeat. I tried to calm myself, focusing on the familiarity of my friend's home. Surely, I would find refuge there. As I reached her building, a wave of relief washed over me. I climbed the stairs two at a time, barely registering the creaking of the wooden steps beneath my feet. I knocked frantically on her door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Rachel. It's me," I called out, urgency coating my voice. Moments later, the door swung open, revealing her concerned face. "What's wrong?" she asked, ushering me inside before closing the door tightly behind me. I got this strange phone call," I stammered, struggling to catch my breath. "They told me to run, that something was coming for me." Rachel's eyes widened, concern morphing into disbelief. "You're serious? Are you sure you're okay?" I nodded, forcing myself to steady my breathing. "I think I'm losing my mind, but I don't know who to trust. I had to get away. Please, I just need to stay here for a bit." "Of course. You can stay as long as you need," she said, leading me into her cozy living room. The familiar scent of cinnamon and vanilla wrapped around me, a comforting reminder of happier times spent together. I sank onto her couch, the soft fabric enveloping me as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. What if they find me? I whispered, the words heavy with fear. "Who are they?" Rachel pressed, her brow furrowed. "Are you sure it wasn't just a prank? Maybe you should call the police." "No," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I don't want to involve anyone else. What if it's worse than I think? What if they're watching me right now?" She opened her mouth to respond but stopped, her expression shifting as she glanced toward the window. I followed her gaze, suddenly aware of the stillness outside. The shadows stretched long and dark, the streetlights casting an eerie glow on the pavement. "It's just the streetlights," Rachel reassured me, but the tightness in her voice betrayed her unease. I could sense it, the heaviness in the air, the feeling of something lurking just beyond our sight. "Can you stay with me for a bit?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Of course," she said softly. "Let's watch something. Maybe it'll help take your mind off things." We settled on the couch, the flickering light from the television illuminating the room. But I couldn't focus on the screen. My mind was a maelstrom of anxiety. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see a face staring back at me. Hours passed, and with each tick of the clock, the feeling of dread grew. "Rachel," I finally said, breaking the silence. "Do you believe in the supernatural?" She turned to me, surprise evident in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. I just feel like something is out there, something beyond our understanding." The phone call felt different, like it was coming from a place that shouldn't exist. Rachel studied me for a moment, her expression softening. "I've had my share of strange experiences, but I don't think you should let fear consume you. It's easy to let our imaginations run wild in situations like this." "Maybe," I murmured, though doubt gnawed at me. The unease in my gut was unrelenting, a constant reminder that I wasn't safe. Just then, the television flickered, the screen glitching momentarily. I jumped, a jolt of panic coursing through me. "Did you see that?" Rachel frowned, glancing at the screen. "It's probably just a bad connection," she replied. But I could feel it, the sensation that we were being watched, that whatever had spoken to me on the phone was drawing closer. "I need to check my phone," I said, my voice shaking. I fished it out of my pocket, the screen dark and unresponsive. "It's dead," I said, feeling the weight of despair settle in. "Let me see," Rachel offered, taking the device and pressing buttons, but nothing happened. "We can charge it." "It's probably just the battery," she reassured me, though her eyes revealed a flicker of concern. I leaned back against the couch, trying to calm my racing heart. "I just want to feel safe," I whispered, but the words felt hollow. As we sat in silence, the room seemed to grow heavier, shadows creeping closer as the clock ticked away the minutes. Rachel's phone buzzed suddenly, shattering the stillness. She quickly grabbed it, a frown crossing her face as she read the message. "Who is it?" I asked, anxiety pooling in my stomach. "It's just a group chat," she replied, her voice tense. "Nothing important." But I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the way her fingers trembled slightly. My heart sank. The sense of foreboding loomed over us like a storm cloud, ready to unleash its fury. "Let's try to sleep," Rachel suggested, her voice soft. "We can figure things out in the morning." I nodded, though sleep felt impossible. As Rachel led me to the guest room, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread tightening around me. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with fear. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern flooding her voice. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, forcing a smile. As I lay down, the darkness enveloped me, and I stared at the ceiling, unable to shake the whispers echoing in my mind. "Run," they urged, the command clear and haunting. Eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreams filled with shadows and voices. I was running through a dark forest, the branches clawing at me, the ground shifting beneath my feet. I could hear them, those whispers, urging me to flee, to escape. But no matter how fast I ran, I could never seem to get away. I woke suddenly, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. The room was dark and silent, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread washing over me. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 2 a.m. A soft knock on the door made my heart race. I sat up, straining to hear. "Rachel?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a bad dream," I replied, forcing my voice to steady. Do you want me to come in? I hesitated, the fear still clinging to me. Yeah, I finally admitted, and she opened the door, stepping into the dim light. Do you want to talk about it? She asked, concern etched on her face. I don't know, I admitted, feeling vulnerable. It was just dark. I couldn't escape. Rachel sat beside me on the bed, her presence comforting. You're safe here, she reminded me gently. We'll figure this out together. As I leaned against her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was looming just outside, waiting for the moment to strike. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the shadows danced just out of reach. In that moment, I realized this was only the beginning. The warmth of Rachel's presence offered me a temporary reprieve from the gnawing fear that clung to my insides. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my anxiety begin to lift slightly. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to fade, replaced by the flickering light from the street lamp outside. Do you want some water? Rachel asked softly, breaking the silence. Yeah, that would help, I replied, grateful for her distraction. She stood up and headed for the kitchen, and I watched her go, my heart still racing. The apartment felt oddly quiet, the only sound being the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, trying to gather my thoughts. Moments later, Rachel returned with a glass of water, handing it to me. Here you go, she said, her eyes scanning my face for signs of distress. Thanks, I murmured, taking a sip. The cool liquid soothed my dry throat, but it did little to ease the turmoil in my mind. Do you want to talk about your dream? She asked, her voice gentle yet probing. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to relive the terror. It was just a nightmare. I was running, but I could never escape. It felt so real. Sometimes dreams can reflect what we're feeling, she said, sitting back down beside me. Maybe it's your mind trying to process everything that's happening. I guess, I said, taking another sip of water. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was a darkness creeping into my reality, something I couldn't explain away as mere anxiety or fear. As the minutes passed, I could feel my eyelids growing heavy, but sleep felt like an unattainable luxury. What if they come for me here? I whispered, the thought surfacing like a chilling breeze. Rachel frowned, her brow furrowing in concern. Who, exactly? The people from the call? I don't know. I just feel like something is following me, I admitted, the vulnerability of my confession hanging in the air. Maybe you should try to get some sleep. We can figure everything out in the morning, she said, her voice soothing. Okay, but can you stay? I asked, a hint of desperation in my tone. Of course. I'll stay right here, she reassured me, settling back against the pillows. As I closed my eyes, I tried to focus on her presence, hoping it would shield me from the encroaching darkness. But sleep proved elusive, and I found myself drifting in and out of consciousness, each time waking to the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Eventually, I must have succumbed to fatigue because I awoke to the first light of dawn filtering through the curtains. The world outside was painted in soft hues of gold and pink, but my relief was short-lived. The night's terrors lingered, taunting me from the edges of my mind. I turned to find Rachel still asleep beside me, her peaceful expression a stark contrast to my turbulent thoughts. I gently slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and headed to the kitchen. I needed coffee, a strong cup to chase away the remnants of fear that clung to me like a shroud. As I prepared the coffee maker, my mind wandered back to the call. What did it mean? Was it some sort of sick prank, or was there a deeper, more sinister intention behind it? Just then, my phone buzzed, and I nearly dropped the mug I was holding. Heart racing, I snatched it from the counter and stared at the screen. There was a notification from a message app, and I hesitated before opening it, dread pooling in my stomach. It was from an unknown number. You thought you could escape? We are coming. Panic surged through me. I quickly turned off the screen, gripping the phone tightly. No, 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 I muttered under my breath. I couldn't let Rachel see this. She was already worried enough. I poured the coffee and leaned against the counter, trying to calm my breathing. I needed a plan. I couldn't stay here forever, and I couldn't let whatever was pursuing me close in. Rachel emerged from the bedroom, her hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep. "Hey," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile as I tried to mask my distress. "Just making coffee." She smiled back, but her expression turned serious when she noticed my tense posture. "Are you sure? You look pale." "I'm fine. Just a little tired," I replied, pouring a cup and handing it to her. "Thanks," she said, taking a sip and closing her eyes in appreciation. "So, what's the plan for today?" I hesitated, knowing I had to say something. "Maybe we should look into the call?" "I don't know. See if anyone else has experienced something similar?" "Sounds like a good idea." "We can check online and maybe call some friends for help," Rachel suggested, her eyes brightening with determination. "Yeah, let's do that," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. We settled at the kitchen table, both with our cups of coffee, and I began to search for any information I could find. I typed in keywords like mysterious phone call and strange voices, my heart racing with each click of the keyboard. But as I sifted through articles and forum posts, I found nothing that matched my experience. Just urban legends and anecdotes that seemed like a far cry from my own terrifying reality. Rachel leaned closer, her brow furrowing as she scanned the screen. "It's like there's nothing here." "Are you sure it was a real call?" "I don't know," I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. It felt real. The voices, they were so clear. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness before returning to life. Rachel and I exchanged glances, a chill running down my spine. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I said, dread creeping in again. "Maybe we should get out of here," she suggested, her eyes darting toward the window. "Yeah, let's go for a walk." "Clear our heads," I agreed, but my stomach twisted with unease. We grabbed our coats and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The world outside was a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. The sun was shining brightly, and people were already bustling about, going about their daily routines. But as we walked through the neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. The warmth of the sun felt like a false sense of security, and the voices in my mind urged me to run again. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, noticing my distracted expression. "Yeah, just taking it all in," I replied, forcing a smile. As we continued walking, I spotted a group of people gathered near a park, their voices rising in excitement. Curiosity piqued, we approached to see what was happening. A small crowd had gathered around a man holding a microphone, speaking animatedly. "This is a safe space for anyone who feels they've been touched by the unknown," he announced, his voice echoing. "Join us in sharing your stories, your experiences. You're not alone." I exchanged a glance with Rachel, my heart racing. Maybe this was what we needed, a chance to connect with others who understood what we were going through. Should we go? Rachel asked, her eyes shining with interest. Definitely, I replied, feeling a flicker of hope. As we joined the crowd, I felt a sense of camaraderie building among us, a shared understanding that bound us together. People were recounting their stories, strange encounters, unexplainable phenomena. But as I listened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was lurking just beneath the surface. Some of us have had experiences with unknown calls, voices that beckon us. A woman spoke up, her voice trembling. It's terrifying, but we're here to support one another. My heart raced as I realized this was what I had been looking for. I leaned in closer, desperate to hear more, but a sense of foreboding gnawed at me. In that moment, I understood. I had stumbled into something much bigger than I had anticipated. The darkness that followed me was not just a personal battle, it was part of a collective horror that was reaching out to ensnare us all. I turned to Rachel, fear etched on my face. What if we're in over our heads? Before she could respond, a chilling wind swept through the park, causing everyone to shiver. The man at the microphone paused, his eyes scanning the crowd as if sensing something ominous approaching. The whispers echoed in my mind once more. Run, don't look back. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, caught between the fear of what was chasing me and the terrifying unknown that lay ahead. The wind howled around us, and I felt an inexplicable urge to flee, to escape the encroaching darkness that seemed to be closing in from all sides. The atmosphere shifted, thickening with tension as the man at the microphone resumed speaking, but his words felt distant, drowned out by the chaos in my mind. Listen closely, he urged the crowd, his voice suddenly steady. We are not just gathering for support, we are here to confront the shadows together. We must not let fear dictate our lives. Rachel clutched my arm, her grip tight. Are you sure about this? She whispered, concern flooding her eyes. No, I admitted, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. But we can't ignore this. Maybe someone here knows something we don't. As the crowd murmured in agreement, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay grounded. I had to push through the anxiety swirling in my mind to confront whatever it was that had latched onto me. The man continued to speak, sharing stories of those who had experienced similar calls, who felt the presence of something otherworldly lurking just beyond their reach. We must face our fears together, because isolation is what gives them power, he said, his voice rising with conviction. Around me, people nodded, their expressions a mixture of fear and determination. I felt a flicker of hope igniting within me, a realization that I was not alone in this battle. Then, the sky darkened abruptly, as if a shadow had passed overhead. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I looked up to see ominous clouds rolling in, blotting out the sun. A chill swept through the air, and my heart raced with a sense of foreboding. Everyone, please stay calm, the man shouted, but panic began to spread as people exchanged worried glances. What's happening? Rachel asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, I replied, my stomach twisting. But it doesn't feel right. Suddenly, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket, and I jumped, pulling it out with shaking hands. The screen lit up with a message from the same unknown number. You think you can hide? We will find you. Panic surged through me, and I looked at Rachel, fear etched on my face. We need to go, now. She nodded, her expression serious. We pushed our way through the crowd, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I scanned the area for any signs of danger. I could feel the whispers creeping back, urging me to run, to escape before it was too late. As we reached the edge of the park, I glanced back to see the man still speaking, his voice growing more frantic as the crowd started to disperse in fear. The clouds above churned menacingly, a dark omen hovering over us all. "Where to?" Rachel asked, her voice strained. "Back to your apartment. It's the safest place we have right now," I replied, my mind racing. We hurried through the streets, the chaos of the crowd still fresh in my mind. The shadows lengthened around us, and every corner felt like a potential trap. I fought the urge to look over my shoulder to check if something was following us. When we finally reached Rachel's apartment, I burst through the door, urgency propelling me inside. I locked it tightly behind us and leaned against it, my heart pounding. "Okay, what now?" Rachel asked, her voice shaky as she turned to me. "I need to find out more about these calls," I said, my mind racing. "Maybe there's something online, something that can help us." Rachel nodded, and we both headed for our laptop. As it powered on, the oppressive silence of the apartment enveloped us, broken only by the soft hum of the electronics. I typed furiously, searching for anything related to strange phone calls or unexplained phenomena. The sense of urgency felt palpable as the minutes ticked away. "There has to be something," I muttered, frustration creeping in. Finally, I stumbled upon a forum thread discussing the voices. A shiver ran down my spine as I read through the chilling accounts of others who had experienced similar phenomena, disturbing phone calls from unknown numbers, voices telling them to run or hide. I glanced at Rachel, who was peering over my shoulder, her expression a mix of intrigue and fear. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's all the same, people receiving calls that seem to come from nowhere, warnings about impending danger. Some claim they've seen figures lurking in the shadows," I explained, my heart racing as I read more. "Others say they felt a pull, a compulsion to act, to leave their homes." "This is insane," Rachel said, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you sure it's not just a prank or some urban legend?" "It might be, but it feels too real. And the timing, everything that's happened since the call started." My voice trailed off as I realized how connected it all felt. Just then, the lights flickered again, and I glanced toward the window. The clouds outside had thickened, casting an unnatural gloom over the apartment. A heavy silence fell, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "We should keep the curtains closed," I suggested, urgency creeping into my tone. "We can't let anyone see inside." Rachel hurried to close the curtains, the fabric blocking out the ominous light. I sat back down at the laptop, my heart racing as I tried to formulate a plan. "Look," I said, pointing at the screen, "there's a meetup tonight for those who've experienced similar calls. Maybe we should go." Rachel frowned, uncertainty clouding her features. "Do you really think that's a good idea? What if it's a trap?" "It might be," I admitted, "but we can't just sit here waiting for something to happen. We need to confront this head on." Reluctantly, Rachel nodded, and we decided to gather more information before heading out. As we scoured the internet for details, I felt the weight of the unknown pressing in around us. The air felt thick, charged with electricity, as if the world outside was holding its breath in anticipation. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again, and my heart sank. I hesitated before picking it up, knowing full well what might await me. It was another message from the unknown number: "You've made a grave mistake. You cannot escape us." I looked at Rachel, dread pooling in my stomach. "It's getting worse. We need to go, now." Without another word, we gathered our things, my mind racing as we prepared to face whatever lay ahead. As we stepped outside, the world felt different, charged with a sense of danger, as if the very air around us was alive with tension. I could hear the faint whispers again, urging me to flee, but I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. Together, we stepped into the gathering storm, ready to confront the darkness that threatened to consume us. The streets were eerily quiet as Rachel and I made our way toward the location of the meetup. The once familiar neighborhood felt foreign, the shadows growing deeper with each passing moment. I could sense the tension in the air, like a coiled spring ready to snap. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Rachel asked, glancing around nervously. "Yeah, I checked the address twice." "It's just a few more blocks," I replied, but uncertainty gnawed at me. The chilling atmosphere made it hard to shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we walked, the clouds above seemed to thicken, blocking out the last remnants of daylight. A cold breeze whipped around us, sending a shiver down my spine. I hugged my jacket tighter, trying to ward off the creeping sense of dread. "I don't like this," Rachel said, her voice trembling slightly. "Can we turn back?" I paused, glancing back the way we had come. "We can't. We need to know what's happening. We can't be the only ones dealing with this." Rachel nodded reluctantly, but I could see the worry etched on her face. We continued onward, the ominous feeling intensifying with every step. When we finally arrived at the address, I was taken aback by the dimly lit warehouse that loomed before us. Its broken windows and peeling paint gave it an unsettling air, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. "This is it?" Rachel asked, hesitating on the threshold. "Yeah," I replied, forcing confidence into my voice. "Let's just see what's going on inside." We stepped into the warehouse, and the heavy door creaked shut behind us, plunging us into near darkness. The air was thick and musty, the scent of dampness hanging heavy. A small group of people had gathered in the center of the space, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of candles scattered around. The atmosphere felt charged, like static electricity hanging in the air. I looked around, noting the varying expressions on people's faces: fear, determination, and a sense of shared understanding. We were not alone in this. Others had felt the pull of the unknown. "Welcome," a woman with piercing blue eyes said, stepping forward to address the group. "We are here to share our experiences and confront the shadows that haunt us." I felt a chill run down my spine. Her gaze seemed to penetrate through the facade I had built, exposing the fear that lay beneath. "We're all here because we've heard the voices, felt the presence of something lurking just beyond our reach," she continued, her voice steady. "It's time to take back control." As she spoke, I noticed a man in the back, his expression haunted, his hands trembling slightly. He caught my eye and gestured for me to come closer. "Have you experienced the calls?" he whispered urgently. "Yes, I have," I replied, my heart racing. "They've been trying to warn me." He nodded, his expression grave. "You're in danger. They're not just whispers, they're real. I can feel it." "What do you mean?" I pressed, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. "There are those who have been taken. You can't let them find you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They will come for you. It's a game to them." Just then, the lights flickered, plunging the warehouse into darkness for a brief moment before the candles sputtered back to life. Gasps rippled through the group, and I felt the weight of fear pressing on us all. "We need to share our stories," the woman with blue eyes said, attempting to restore calm. "Only by facing what haunts us can we find strength." One by one, People began to share their experiences, each tale more unsettling than the last. Voices warning them to run, shadows stalking them in the night, the feeling of being watched. I sat in silence, my heart pounding as I listened. Each story resonated with my own experiences, and I could feel the fear coiling tighter around me. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to speak. I received a call that felt more like a warning. I've heard voices urging me to flee, telling me I'm in danger. Murmurs of understanding rippled through the crowd, and I felt a strange sense of solidarity. But I don't know what I'm running from, I added, my voice shaking slightly. The woman nodded, her expression serious. The unknown is powerful, but we are stronger together. We can find a way to confront this. As the stories continued, I noticed the man from before retreating into the shadows, his expression growing more frantic. I could see the panic building within him, and my instincts told me something was wrong. Suddenly, he lunged forward, his eyes wild with fear. They're coming. We have to go. The atmosphere shifted instantly, panic erupting in the crowd. People began to scatter, the air thick with urgency. Rachel grabbed my arm, her face pale. Is it true? She asked, her voice trembling. Are they really coming? I don't know. I yelled, adrenaline coursing through me as I tried to keep my composure. The lights flickered again, the candles sputtering wildly. The shadows in the warehouse danced ominously, and I felt a primal urge to flee. Follow me, I shouted, leading Rachel toward the exit, my heart racing. We pushed through the crowd, the sounds of chaos ringing in my ears as people rushed toward the doors. The man who had warned us was at the forefront, his face twisted in fear. Stay together. We can't let them isolate us, he shouted, his voice breaking. I glanced over my shoulder, a chill running through me as I saw dark figures emerging from the shadows, their forms indistinct but undeniably menacing. Run! I yelled, adrenaline propelling me forward. Rachel and I burst through the doors and into the cool night air, the adrenaline surging through my veins. We sprinted down the street, the sounds of the chaos behind us fading into the distance. But the fear that gripped me was far from dissipated. I could feel the shadows closing in, the whispers echoing in my mind once more. Where do we go? Rachel gasped, breathless from the run. Anywhere but here, I replied, my mind racing as I searched for a safe place. We turned down a narrow alleyway, the darkness enveloping us like a shroud. I could still hear the whispers, urging me to run, to escape the impending danger. As we pressed further into the alley, I felt a sudden pull, as if something was tugging at my very essence. The shadows around us seemed to pulse and writhe, and I knew we couldn't stay here. We need to find somewhere safe, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. Rachel nodded, her eyes wide with fear as she scanned our surroundings. Look! There's a cafe up ahead. We dashed toward the warm glow of the cafe's lights, our hearts pounding in unison. As we entered, the warmth enveloped us, a brief reprieve from the cold, dark night outside. But the sense of safety was fleeting. The whispers grew louder in my mind, and I could feel the darkness pressing in, threatening to swallow me whole. We found a secluded corner in the cafe, and I tried to catch my breath, but the fear clawed at me. What's happening? I whispered to Rachel, my voice shaking. I don't know, but we can't let them take us, she replied, her expression resolute. We sat in silence, the chaos outside fading into the background. I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on me, and I knew that we couldn't hide forever. As I glanced around the cafe, a thought struck me. What if we confront the voices? I said, the idea taking root. What do you mean? Rachel asked, her brow furrowing. What if we try to communicate with them? Find out what they want? Her eyes widened in shock. You can't be serious. What if it makes things worse? I know it sounds crazy, but we've tried running and hiding. It hasn't worked. Maybe this is our only option, I replied, determination building within me. Rachel hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. Okay, but we need to be careful. I nodded, feeling a strange resolve settle within me. Let's do this. We found a quiet spot in the cafe, the hum of conversation fading into the background. I closed my eyes, focusing on the whispers in my mind, willing them to reveal themselves. Show yourselves, I whispered, my heart racing. What do you want from us? The air grew heavy, and I could feel the presence of something shifting around us, the shadows stretching and contorting in unnatural ways. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a chorus, echoing in my mind. You cannot escape, they warned, a chilling resonance that sent shivers down my spine. You belong to us. Panic surged through me, but I fought to remain calm. No. We won't let you take us. The shadows around us surged, dark tendrils reaching out, and I could feel the grip of fear tightening around my heart. Leave us alone, Rachel shouted, her voice breaking through the oppressive darkness. In that moment, a fierce light erupted within me, a surge of defiance rising to the surface. We will fight you. We will not be your prey. The shadows recoiled, the whispers turning to wails of anger, echoing in the corners of the cafe. I felt a wave of power coursing through me, and I knew we could push back. Together, I cried, grabbing Rachel's hand. As we held onto each other, the light within us intensified, illuminating the shadows that surrounded us. The whispers began to fade, replaced by a cacophony of confusion and rage. Leave. You cannot hold us. I shouted, my voice ringing out like a battle cry. In a blinding flash, the shadows dissipated, the darkness retreating into the corners of the cafe. The air felt lighter, the weight of fear lifting as the presence faded away. We opened our eyes, breathless and trembling, as the normalcy of the cafe returned. Patrons looked at us curiously, unaware of the battle we had just fought. What just happened? Rachel breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. I think we faced them, I said, still reeling from the experience. But why? What do they want? She asked, her expression shifting from fear to confusion. I don't know, I admitted, but we need to keep searching for answers. We can't stop now. Together, we stepped back into the world outside, ready to confront whatever awaited us next. The night felt different, the shadows less threatening. But deep within, I knew the battle was far from over. As we walked down the street, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. But what lay ahead still loomed like a storm on the horizon, and I knew we would need to prepare for the fight of our lives. The night was far from over, yet it felt as if a new dawn was on the horizon. With each step away from the cafe, I could feel the shadows retreating, but I knew they were still lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment to strike again. We need a plan, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. We can't keep running. We have to find out who, or what, these voices are. I nodded, contemplating our next move. The meeting mentioned a group that's been dealing with similar experiences. Maybe they have more information. Rachel's eyes lit up with understanding. Yes. Let's go back and see if we can find them. If they've been through this, they might know how to fight back. With newfound determination, we retraced our steps through the now familiar streets, heading toward the warehouse. The memory of the chaos that had erupted there lingered in my mind, but I pushed it aside, focusing on our goal. As we arrived, I noticed a flickering light in the distance, a reassuring glow that seemed to draw us closer. The atmosphere was charged with urgency, and I felt a knot of anticipation building in my stomach. The group was gathered outside, their faces illuminated by the pale light of a makeshift bonfire. They looked up as we approached, expressions shifting from surprise to recognition. "There they are," the woman with the blue eyes exclaimed, stepping forward to greet us. "We were worried you might not make it back." "We had to come," I said, catching my breath. We faced the voices in the cafe. "We need to know what you all have discovered." A ripple of concern spread through the group, and I could feel their fear reflecting my own. "What did you learn?" the man from before, who had warned us earlier, asked, his voice trembling. "They told us we belonged to them," Rachel replied, her tone resolute. "But we pushed back. We need to understand what they want and how to stop them." The group murmured among themselves, exchanging worried glances. The woman with the blue eyes stepped forward again. "It's not just whispers. They're more than that. They are entities that feed on fear, using our emotions against us." "But why us?" I asked, confusion flooding my mind. "What makes us targets?" "Because we are vulnerable," she explained, her gaze steady. "We've experienced trauma, isolation, moments of weakness. They thrive on those emotions." A chilling silence fell over us as the weight of her words sunk in. "We need to confront our fears," she continued. "Only then can we weaken their hold on us." The group began to share their stories again, each tale more harrowing than the last. Each experience wove a tapestry of darkness that surrounded us, and I felt the shadows creeping back, feeding on our shared fear. I glanced at Rachel, who looked pale but determined. "We have to face this together," I whispered. "We can't let them win." As the stories unfolded, I realized we had the power to combat the darkness by sharing our truths, by confronting the very things that haunted us. It was a terrifying prospect, but I felt the adrenaline surging through my veins. "We need to find a way to summon them," I said, my voice gaining strength. "We need to show them we're not afraid." The group fell silent, considering my words. "But how?" the man asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "We need to create a circle," I proposed. "A space where we can all connect our energy and confront them together." The woman nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "It's worth a try. If we can draw them in, we might just have a chance to fight back." We gathered supplies from the warehouse, using candles and stones to form a circle in the dirt. The flickering lights cast dancing shadows, a reminder of the very thing we sought to confront. Once we were ready, I felt the weight of anticipation settle on my shoulders. "We need to focus on our fears," I instructed, my heart racing. "Share them with the group, and together we will create a shield against the darkness." One by one, we spoke our truths, exposing the fears that had haunted us for so long. Each confession echoed through the night, and with each revelation, I felt the bond between us strengthen. As the last voice faded, I closed my eyes and focused, channeling the energy of the group. "We are stronger together," I shouted, my voice ringing out into the night. "We will not be afraid." The shadows swirled around us, and I could feel the presence of something sinister drawing closer. The whispers echoed in my mind, taunting and jeering. "Join us," I cried, forcing my will against the darkness. "We refuse to be your prey." A chilling laugh reverberated through the air, and I felt a rush of cold envelop me. "You think you can resist?" a voice echoed, smooth and mocking. "You are already ours." The air crackled with energy, and I sensed the otherworldly entities manifesting around us. They were shadowy figures, indistinct yet terrifying, their forms shifting and writhing like smoke. "Face us," I demanded, my heart pounding. "We know you exist. Show yourselves." In response, the shadows surged forward, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me, threatening to pull me under. But I fought against it, remembering the strength of the group surrounding me. The woman with the blue eyes stepped forward, her voice steady. "We stand united. You cannot take us." The shadows recoiled slightly, as if struck. "You think you have power here?" the voice sneered. "You are nothing but fragile humans." I clenched my fists, channeling the energy of my fear and turning it into resolve. "We are more than that," I shouted. "We are strong. We will not be silenced." With each word, I could feel the light within me growing, pushing back against the darkness. The shadows writhed, their forms flickering in and out of focus, and I could see their fear mirrored in the chaos surrounding us. "Leave us," Rachel cried, her voice piercing through the cacophony. "You have no power here." As we shouted in unison, the shadows began to dissipate, retreating into the corners of the circle. I felt the grip of fear loosening, and a surge of strength pulsed through me. "Together," I urged, raising my hands as the energy of the group coalesced around us. "We can drive them away." The shadows screamed, their voices mingling with our own, a chorus of fury and fear. But we stood our ground, the light within us shining brighter with each moment. With one final cry, we pushed back against the darkness, and in a blinding flash, the shadows exploded into 1,000 fragments, scattering into the night. As the echoes of their cries faded, a profound silence fell over us. We stood there, panting and breathless, the weight of the encounter lifting. "We did it," Rachel breathed, disbelief etched on her face. "We actually did it." The group began to cheer, the energy palpable as we embraced one another, relief washing over us. But deep inside, I knew this was only a temporary victory. The darkness may have retreated, but it would return, and we would need to be ready to face it again. The battle against the whispers was far from over, but we had taken the first step. Together, we would uncover the truth behind the shadows, confront our fears, and fight for our lives. As the dawn began to break on the horizon, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. We were not alone in this fight, and together, we would stand strong against whatever awaited us in the darkness. Night walk. Have you ever felt the night closing in around you, like a thick fog wrapping itself around your body? It's a sensation that seeps into your bones, an unease that whispers to you that something is not quite right. I found myself standing at the edge of the park, the moon hanging high in the sky, illuminating the path ahead like a spotlight. It was just after midnight, and the world had slipped into a stillness that felt unnatural. The trees, once lively under the sun, now loomed like dark sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I often took late-night walks to clear my mind, but tonight felt different. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic that clung to my senses, making my stomach churn. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind that often played with me during the quiet hours. As I stepped onto the path, the gravel crunched under my feet, a sound so loud in the silence that I felt it echo through the empty park. I glanced around, half expecting someone, or something, to emerge from the shadows. The park was a familiar place, a refuge during the day filled with laughter and sunlight. Now, under the blanket of night, it transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and silence, each corner concealing secrets I wasn't ready to uncover. I continued down the path, the moonlight casting eerie shapes that danced before my eyes. The benches, once inviting, appeared as dark alcoves, and the playground seemed to groan under the weight of its own loneliness. I quickened my pace, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck prickling as if someone was watching me. It was ridiculous, I thought. I was alone, after all, but the feeling persisted, clawing at the edges of my consciousness. As I rounded a corner, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow darting behind a tree. My heart raced, and I stopped, holding my breath. I squinted into the darkness, trying to discern whether it was an animal or something else entirely. But the shadow disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a silence that felt almost mocking. I shook my head, trying to dispel the rising dread. "It's just your mind playing tricks," I whispered to myself, the sound of my voice a reassurance against the encroaching darkness. But even as I spoke, I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on me, watching from the depths of the park. I moved on, my steps now more hurried, each footfall a reminder of the solitude that surrounded me. I reached the heart of the park, where the trees parted to reveal a small clearing. In the center stood a fountain, its water still, reflecting the moonlight like a sheet of glass. I paused for a moment, captivated by its beauty, but the tranquility was short-lived. A sound, soft yet distinct, sliced through the air, a muffled cry that sent chills racing down my spine. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to escape this place that had morphed from familiar to foreboding. But curiosity rooted me to the spot. I moved closer to the edge of the clearing, straining to hear more. The sounds came again, urgent, desperate. It was a voice, a plea for help. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky in the stillness. "Is anyone there?" The only response was the rustling of leaves in the wind, a cruel reminder of my isolation. Compelled by an inexplicable urge, I stepped into the shadows beyond the clearing, the weight of my footsteps heavier than before. As I ventured deeper, the air turned colder, wrapping around me like a shroud. With each step, the sounds grew clearer, more frantic. The realization that I was not alone wrapped itself around my heart like a vice. I peered through the dense thicket of trees, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Two figures were silhouetted against the dim light, a struggle unfolding before my eyes. A flash of silver, was it a knife, glinted in the darkness, and the panic surged through me. This was no ordinary fight, something sinister was happening, and I was a witness, powerless to intervene. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing like a warning in my ears. I needed to get out, to flee from this nightmare, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The reality of what I was witnessing washed over me like a wave, and I realized the danger I was in. They didn't know I was here, but if they found me... Just as I turned to escape, the cry pierced the air again. This time, it was louder, filled with desperation. My instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity, a darker part of me, compelled me to stay. I was trapped between fear and the need to understand what was happening. What had begun as a simple walk had spiraled into something I couldn't comprehend, a brush with darkness that felt all too real. As I stood there, hidden among the trees, the tension grew unbearable. The events unfolding before me were not just a reflection of the night, but of the very real danger lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone to step too far into its grasp. I felt a shift in the air, a tension that snapped like a taut string. Suddenly, one of the figures turned, and in that instant, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I had been seen. The figure that had turned was cloaked in darkness, but there was something unnerving about the way they moved, quick, predatory, like a wolf detecting the scent of prey. My heart raced as I crouched lower, pressing my back against the rough bark of the tree. I could barely breathe, every instinct urging me to run. But where could I go? The shadows offered no refuge, only deeper darkness. I forced myself to peer through the branches, straining to catch a glimpse of the scene before me. The struggle continued, but now the cries were joined by another sound, an urgent whisper that slipped through the air like smoke. I could make out two figures, one clearly on the ground, the other towering over them. The moonlight flickered against something shiny, and dread pulled in my stomach. "Please, just let me go." The voice of the person on the ground trembled with fear, sending shivers down my spine. The taller figure leaned closer, their shadows swallowing the light around them. I could see the outline of their face, a mask of fury and darkness, features distorted by the shadows. The glint of metal caught my eye again, and my heart sank. I had to get out of here. Without thinking, I began to back away slowly, desperate to escape the nightmare unfolding in front of me. My feet were silent against the cool ground, but the deeper I went into the trees, the more aware I became of the branches snagging at my clothes, threatening to betray my presence. Then, I heard it, the crack of a twig snapping behind me. I froze, every nerve ending tingling with fear. I turned slowly, holding my breath, and came face to face with a pair of dark eyes peering through the foliage. They were cold and unfeeling, like the abyss itself staring back at me. My heart raced as I turned back toward the clearing, knowing I had to get away. But the figure above the victim had noticed, their heads snapping in my direction as if sensing my presence. I could see their eyes now, wide and searching. "Who's there?" they barked, the voice sharp and filled with authority. I felt my throat tighten, and I swallowed hard, knowing that any sound could give me away. Panicking, I turned and bolted, weaving through the trees, my heart pounding like a drum. The adrenaline surged through my veins, and I pushed myself faster, branches clawing at my skin. I could hear their footsteps behind me, heavy and relentless, the sound of pursuit that made my stomach churn. I was almost free of the trees when I heard the shout behind me, "Stop." It was a command, filled with anger and urgency. I didn't dare look back. I forced myself to run harder, my lungs burning, each breath a struggle as I burst into the clearing. The moonlight hit me like a wave, illuminating my surroundings, and I took a moment to scan the area. There was no sign of escape. The path I had come from was dark and foreboding, and the exit seemed miles away. I felt the weight of despair settle over me, but I had to keep moving. I sprinted toward the park's entrance, every nerve screaming at me to keep going. I could hear their footsteps growing closer, the sound of their breath ragged with exertion. The realization that they were right behind me sent a fresh wave of fear crashing over me, and I pushed myself harder, willing my legs to move faster. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed my shoulder, yanking me back. I gasped, spinning around, ready to fight, but the figure was not the same as before. It was a stranger, a man, looking just as terrified as I felt. He was breathing heavily, eyes wide with panic. "They're coming," he said, his voice barely a whisper, eyes darting around as if expecting the shadows to close in on us. "What do you mean?" I managed to stammer, my heart still racing from the chase. I saw what happened, he continued, his voice urgent. We need to get out of here before they find us. They're dangerous. Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the trees. The man grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the exit as we raced together through the park. Every instinct urged me to trust him, even as doubt gnawed at my mind. Who was this person? And why was he here, just like me? Do you know where to go? I gasped, glancing back over my shoulder, but the figures were lost among the trees, hidden from view. There's a house nearby. We can hide there until it's safe, he replied, urgency lacing his tone. We sprinted toward the street, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung in the air. As we reached the edge of the park, I hesitated, looking back one last time. The darkness seemed to writhe, like it was alive, and a chill crept up my spine. Now, he urged, pulling me forward just as a flash of movement caught my eye. I turned to see the figure emerge from the shadows, their face obscured but the glint of the blade unmistakable. In that moment, I understood this was not just a random act of violence, it was something much darker, something that sought to drag us into its depths. We ran, adrenaline coursing through us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The night had changed me, and as I glanced back, I knew that whatever awaited us beyond the park was more terrifying than I could have imagined. We dashed onto the street, the chill of the night air biting at our skin. The moon hung high above us, a cruel reminder of the danger we were fleeing. I could hear the distant sounds of the city, the hum of cars and the soft whisper of the wind, but they felt far removed from the reality of the terror that chased us. Stay close, the stranger urged, tightening his grip on my hand as we raced down the sidewalk. I glanced at him, his face illuminated by the streetlights, a mix of fear and determination etched across his features. Who was he? Why had he been in the park? The questions swirled in my mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. We need to get to my house, he said breathlessly, glancing back over his shoulder. It's just a few blocks away. Do you think they saw us? I panted, struggling to keep pace. The fear coursing through me was almost palpable, a dark weight that threatened to drag me down. I don't know, he replied, quickening his pace. But we can't stop. Not until we're safe. We turned down a narrow street, the darkness of the night swallowing us whole. I could hear the echo of footsteps behind us, faint but growing louder. My heart raced as I fought to suppress the panic rising in my chest. I forced myself to focus on the sound of our footsteps, the rhythm of our escape. Just ahead, the silhouette of a house loomed against the night sky, its windows dark and uninviting. There, he shouted, pointing toward it. That's my place. We reached the door, and he fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. Hurry! I urged, glancing over my shoulder. The figures were no longer hidden in the shadows. They were emerging from the park, moving with purpose, their eyes scanning the streets. Finally, the door swung open, and we stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the cool wood, my mind racing. The man locked the door, pressing his back against it, his expression grim. We're safe for now, he said, but his voice was tinged with uncertainty. Who were they? I managed to ask, my heart still racing. What's happening? He ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. I don't know exactly, but I've seen them before, hanging around the park late at night. They're not just troublemakers, they're dangerous. What do they want? I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. People like us, he replied, his gaze darkening. They prey on those who wander alone, those who won't be missed. I've heard stories, but I never thought I would see it. The reality of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a sense of dread wash over me. What do we do now? We wait, he said, his voice steadier now, but I could see the fear lurking in his eyes. If they come here, we'll need a plan. We moved deeper into the house, and he led me to a small living room. The walls were lined with bookshelves, dimly lit by a solitary lamp in the corner. I could see a couch and a coffee table scattered with magazines, remnants of a life that felt achingly normal, so different from the chaos outside. He pulled the curtain shut tightly, casting the room into darkness, and I sank onto the couch, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. My thoughts spiraled. What had I witnessed? What was I doing here with a stranger? Do you have a phone? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We should call the police. He shook his head, looking grim. No cell signal out here, and if we call them, it'll take too long. They'll be long gone by the time they arrive. Besides, we don't know if the police are even on our side. I stared at him, bewildered. What do you mean? He took a deep breath, his expression serious. There are things happening in this city, things that go beyond what we can see. The people in the park, they're involved in something much bigger. You don't just stumble into that. I swallowed hard, the panic rising again. So what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and wait? For now, yes, he said, running a hand through his hair. But we need to be ready. If they come here, we need a way to defend ourselves. I nodded, my mind racing. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, mingling with fear and uncertainty. What about weapons? He nodded toward a shelf filled with books and knickknacks. There's a baseball bat in the corner. It's not much, but it might help. I stood up and walked over to grab the bat, the weight of it surprisingly reassuring in my hands. What about you? I asked, looking for anything that could serve as a weapon. He opened a drawer and pulled out a kitchen knife, holding it tightly. This will have to do. Let's just hope we don't need them. As we stood there in the dim light, the silence enveloped us, stretching on as the reality of our situation sank in. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. I shouldn't have been out that night, wandering alone. I had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. I should have known better, I muttered, frustration lacing my words. It's not your fault, he said, his voice calm. This kind of danger doesn't come with a warning. Suddenly, a noise broke through the stillness, a faint rustling outside the house, followed by footsteps crunching on gravel. My heart dropped. They were here. Get ready, he hissed, positioning himself near the door, the knife gripped tightly in his hand. I took a deep breath, gripping the baseball bat as I moved to stand beside him. We held our breath, waiting for the inevitable. The sound grew closer, footsteps echoing in the night, and I felt the dread pooling in my stomach. The footsteps grew louder, each crunch of gravel amplifying the tension in the air. My grip tightened around the baseball bat, my heart pounding in time with the approaching footsteps. We exchanged a quick glance, fear and determination etched across both our faces. There was no going back now. We were trapped in this nightmare together. Stay quiet, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my throat dry, the silence wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. The shadows outside shifted, and I could see the silhouette of a figure moving past the window, stopping momentarily, as if sensing something was amiss. My breath hitched to my throat. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but I knew that any sound would be fatal. The figure lingered outside, scanning the darkness, and I could feel the tension in the room reach a boiling point. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed against the door, causing us both to jump. "They're trying to get in," I hissed, my voice shaking. He glanced at me, his eyes wide. "We need to barricade the door." He rushed over to the coffee table, shoving it against the entrance with all his strength. I joined him, pushing against it, feeling the wood creak under the pressure. As we secured the door, the sound of scraping metal reached our ears. Something sharp dragged along the surface, like claws against the wood. I could feel panic clawing at my insides, and I fought to suppress it. "What are they doing?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Trying to find a way in," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "We can't let them succeed." I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back as I glanced around the room, searching for anything that could help. The windows were shuttered tightly, and the only source of light came from the dim lamp in the corner. I could see the outline of a large bookshelf. Perhaps it could serve as another barrier. "Help me with that," I said, motioning toward the bookshelf. He nodded, and together we pushed it against the door, the weight of it adding an extra layer of protection. As we secured the furniture, the sound outside intensified. A series of heavy knocks resonated against the door, followed by a chilling voice that sent shivers down my spine. "We know you're in there. There's no escape." I exchanged terrified glances with the stranger, his face pale. "They know we're here," he murmured, fear flickering in his eyes. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're part of a gang that's been causing trouble in the area," he replied, his voice shaking slightly. "They target people who wander alone, people who won't be missed." A wave of nausea washed over me as I processed his words. "What do they want with us?" "I don't know," he admitted, his eyes darting nervously. "But we can't let them in. If they do, it'll be over for both of us." Another loud bang shook the door, and I felt my resolve strengthen. I couldn't let fear consume me. "What do we do now?" "We wait for them to make a move," he said, gripping the knife tighter. "If they breach the door, we'll fight." Just then, a loud crash erupted, and the front door splintered under the weight of their assault. I felt the rush of adrenaline spike, propelling me into action. We had to prepare. I grabbed a couple of heavy books from the shelf and tossed them near the door as makeshift projectiles. "If they get through, we can throw these at them," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Good idea," he said, nodding as he stacked a few more near the entrance. We moved quietly, knowing every second counted. The sound of shuffling feet and muffled voices outside sent chills down my spine, and I could barely hear what they were saying. "Don't worry, they'll regret this," one voice growled. "We just want to play." The sinister tone made my blood run cold, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The door creaked ominously as they continued to pound against it, and I could feel the vibrations through the floor. My heart raced as I glanced back at the man beside me. "Are you ready?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'll follow your lead," he replied, determination in his eyes. With one final bang, the door burst open, splintering wood flying across the room as the gang members surged inside, their faces twisted with malice. I barely had time to register their presence before chaos erupted. "Get them," one of the figures shouted, lunging toward us. We sprang into action, the instinct to survive kicking in. I swung the baseball bat with all my strength, connecting with the first attacker's shoulder. He stumbled back, surprised, but quickly regained his balance. "Run!" the man beside me shouted, his voice urgent. He swung the knife at another attacker, but they dodged, their laughter echoing in the small space. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I darted toward the back of the house, adrenaline fueling my movements. I had no idea where I was going, but I needed to put distance between us and them. The sound of chaos erupted behind me, shouts and laughter mixing with the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. I burst into the kitchen, scanning for an escape route. The back door stood ajar, but I could hear footsteps closing in behind me. With no time to think, I made a split-second decision and dashed toward the window, flinging it open just as the first figure barreled into the kitchen. I climbed through the opening, my heart racing as I dropped to the ground outside. The cool night air hit me like a wave, but I barely had a moment to catch my breath before I heard shouting behind me. "Stop!" one of them yelled, and I felt a rush of panic. I glanced back just in time to see the man from the house struggling against two attackers, the knife slipping from his grip. "Go!" he shouted at me, his voice strained. "Get out of here!" I hesitated for a split second, torn between my instinct to help him and the urgency to flee. But the reality of the situation crashed over me like a wave. If I stayed, I'd be caught, and then we'd both be trapped. I turned and ran, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear their footsteps behind me, laughter ringing in the air like a death knell. The street was empty, the darkness stretching out before me, but I knew I couldn't stop. I sprinted down the road, desperate to find safety, to escape the nightmare that threatened to consume me whole. I sprinted down the empty street, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I fought against the cold air that stung my lungs. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, a haunting reminder that I wasn't free yet. I glanced over my shoulder, heart racing, nothing but darkness. Had they stopped? Were they still chasing me? I couldn't afford to look back again. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, desperate to reach safety. The city felt foreign, each street lamp casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of my vision. I had no idea where I was going, but I needed to keep moving. Up ahead, I saw a convenience store with bright neon lights flickering against the night sky. I darted toward it, hoping it would offer some semblance of safety. The door chimed as I burst inside, the warmth enveloping me like a blanket. I quickly scanned the aisles, searching for anyone who might help. The cashier, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his brow furrowing with concern. I hesitated, my words catching in my throat. "There are people chasing me. Please, you have to help." He glanced outside, the faint sounds of laughter and shouting echoing through the glass doors. "Get in the back, quick." Without hesitation, I followed his command, darting toward the rear of the store. The back room was dimly lit, filled with boxes and supplies. "Stay here," he instructed, and I nodded, my heart racing. I could hear the muffled sounds of the door opening, laughter spilling into the store as the gang members entered. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear what was happening. "Did you see anyone come in here?" one of them asked, their voice dripping with malice. "Nope, haven't seen a soul," the cashier replied, his tone casual but laced with underlying tension. "Damn it," another voice muttered. "She couldn't have gone far. Spread out." I felt my stomach drop as their footsteps moved deeper into the store, dread curling like ice in my veins. I needed to think of a way out, fast. The back door? No, too risky. I glanced around, eyes landing on a small window near the ceiling, barely large enough for me to squeeze through. "Hey," I whispered urgently to the cashier, but he waved me off, his eyes darting nervously. "Just wait it out," he murmured. But I couldn't wait. I climbed onto a stack of crates, pushing myself against the wall and scrambling up toward the window. My heart raced as I reached for the latch, praying it would open quietly. It clicked open, and I pushed the window up, taking a deep breath as I prepared to jump. Just then, I heard the gang members approaching. My heart sank. "We'll find her, don't worry," one of them said, the menace in his voice making my skin crawl. "She can't hide forever." "Let's check the back room," another suggested. I had no choice. I scrambled through the window, wincing as the jagged edge scraped against my skin. I dropped down into a narrow alleyway behind the store, the cold ground jarring against my legs. The sounds of the store faded behind me, replaced by the soft rustle of garbage bags and the distant hum of the city. I had to move, had to find somewhere safe to catch my breath and figure out what to do next. I glanced around, my pulse still racing. The alley was dark, littered with trash and debris. I crouched low, peering around the corner to see if the gang members had followed me. The night was still, but I could hear their voices echoing faintly in the distance, angry and frustrated. I needed to get away from here. I turned and ran, making my way through the labyrinth of alleyways behind the stores. The world felt surreal, each corner I turned revealing more shadows and darkness. I needed a plan, something to keep me safe, something to do. Finally, I spotted a small park at the end of the alley. I hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at me. Should I risk it? The park would provide cover, but it was also an open space, and I could easily be spotted. Before I could second-guess myself, I darted into the park, ducking behind a cluster of trees. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I crouched low, straining to hear any approaching footsteps. Time stretched as I listened, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the distant sounds of the city, cars, laughter, the hum of life going on as if nothing had happened. After what felt like an eternity, the voices from the gang grew faint, and I breathed a sigh of relief. For now, I was safe. But the weight of the night pressed down on me, and I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I had to find help, a way to get out of this nightmare. I pulled out my phone, desperate to see if I had any signal. The screen lit up, and I could barely contain my excitement. 2 bars. I quickly dialed the emergency number, my fingers trembling as I pressed the call button. "Please, pick up," I whispered to myself, waiting anxiously as the phone rang. "Emergency services," a calm voice answered on the other end. "What's your emergency?" "I'm in trouble," I blurted out, my voice shaking. "I'm being chased by a gang. I need help." "Can you provide your location?" the operator asked, her tone steady. "I'm near the park by the convenience store on Elm Street," I said, glancing around, searching for any identifying landmarks. "Please hurry. They're after me." "Stay on the line. Help is on the way," she assured me, but my heart sank at the thought of waiting. What if they found me first? "I don't know how long I can stay hidden," I whispered, panic rising in my chest. "Just stay calm," she instructed. "Stay where you are, and don't hang up." I swallowed hard, nodding even though she couldn't see me. I had to stay calm. I couldn't let fear take over. I crouched behind the tree, trying to steady my breathing as I scanned the area. The shadows danced in the moonlight, and I fought the urge to look back toward the path I had taken. Minutes ticked by, stretching into what felt like an eternity. I could hear the distant sounds of the city, but my heart raced, knowing that danger lurked nearby. Just as I began to feel a glimmer of hope, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. My stomach dropped, and I pressed myself against the tree, praying they wouldn't see me. The footsteps drew closer, their echo reverberating in the stillness of the night. My breath hitched in my throat, and I held perfectly still, my heart pounding like a war drum. I peeked around the tree, straining to catch a glimpse of who, or what, was coming. A group of shadowy figures emerged from the path, their laughter slicing through the silence like a knife. My heart raced as I recognized them. It was the gang. They were scanning the park, their movements careless yet purposeful. They were hunting for me. "Did you see where she went?" one of them called out, his voice dripping with menace. "No, but she couldn't have gone far." "Split up and search the area," another responded, his tone impatient. I pressed my back against the rough bark of the tree, trying to merge with the shadows, praying they wouldn't notice me. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, heightening my senses, and I could feel the weight of their gaze as they passed, searching every corner. "I swear I saw her come this way," a third voice chimed in, laced with frustration. "If we don't find her soon, we'll lose her trail." The thought of being cornered sent a fresh wave of panic surging through me. I glanced at my phone, still clutched in my trembling hand. The call was still active, the operator on the line. "Please," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I think they found me." "Stay calm. Stay hidden. Help is on the way," she assured me, but her words felt distant, overshadowed by the encroaching threat. Suddenly, I heard one of the gang members say, "Let's check the trees." My heart raced. They were getting closer. Without thinking, I shifted silently to another tree, hoping to find a better hiding spot. My mind was racing. Should I run? Try to climb? I couldn't let them catch me. I had to outsmart them. As I crouched behind another trunk, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. My fingers brushed against the rough ground, and I spotted a fallen branch nearby. It wasn't much, but it could serve as a makeshift weapon if it came to that. I picked it up, clutching it tightly in my hand as I prepared for the worst. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I listened intently, trying to gauge where they were. The laughter grew louder, more frantic, as they fanned out across the park. "Check the bushes," one shouted, and I stifled a gasp. Suddenly, I heard a crack behind me. I whipped around, heart in my throat, just in time to see a figure stepping out from the shadows, another member of the gang, clearly searching for me. I acted on instinct, stepping back and raising the branch defensively. "Stay away!" I shouted, my voice trembling with fear. He paused, surprised, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Look what we have here, a little mouse trying to be brave," he taunted, taking a step closer. I felt a surge of adrenaline, pushing back my fear. "Don't come any closer," I shouted, swinging the branch as a warning. He dodged, laughter bubbling up from his throat. "You think you can scare me with that? You're all alone, sweetheart." Before I could respond, I heard another set of footsteps approaching. "Where is she?" a different voice yelled, and I felt my heart drop. The man's grin widened as he turned to face his friend. "Found her hiding like a little rat." "Look at her." "Get her," the other called, and my pulse quickened. I had to act fast. With a surge of determination, I swung the branch at the first man, catching him off guard and hitting him square in the shoulder. He stumbled back, cursing as he clutched his arm. I seized the opportunity and took off, sprinting toward the park exit, adrenaline propelling me forward. After her. I heard one of them shout, their footsteps pounding behind me. I burst through the park gates, my heart racing as I hit the street, panic driving my every move. I couldn't let them catch me. I sprinted toward the nearest street, glancing over my shoulder to see how close they were. They were gaining on me, shadows twisting in the darkness, and I felt a surge of desperation. I needed to find a place to hide, somewhere they wouldn't look. I spotted a nearby alley, narrow and dark, and without hesitation, I dove into it, pressing my back against the cool brick wall. My breath came in ragged gasps as I strained to listen, praying they wouldn't find me. The sounds of their footsteps echoed through the street, voices shouting and laughing, the urgency in their tone sending chills down my spine. She went this way. I saw her, one yelled, their laughter cruel. I bit my lip, suppressing the urge to scream. I had to stay quiet. I had to be smart. As they rounded the corner, I could see them searching the alley, their faces twisted in anticipation. She can't be far. Spread out, one commanded. My heart sank as I realized how close they were. I couldn't stay here. I needed to move, but the thought of being caught made my stomach churn. I glanced around, desperately seeking an escape route. I spotted a small door at the end of the alley, slightly ajar. It looked like it led to an old storage building, and I felt a flicker of hope. I dashed toward it, my heart racing as I slipped inside. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it shut behind me, sealing myself in darkness. I took a moment to catch my breath, listening intently for any sign of them. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and decay. I peered through a small window, barely able to see outside. The gang members were milling about the alley, voices rising and falling as they continued their search. They'll find me, I thought, dread settling in my gut. I had to keep moving. I turned to survey my surroundings. The room was cluttered with old boxes and broken furniture, but I spotted a staircase leading up. It was a risk, but I had to take it. Climbing the creaky steps, I reached a small landing with more windows. I peered out, hoping to find a glimpse of a safe path. The street was empty now, the gang members seeming to have moved on, searching elsewhere. But I knew I couldn't stay here long. I needed to find help, a way to escape this nightmare. Suddenly, a noise from downstairs sent my heart racing. I held my breath, straining to listen. Someone was in the building. Search everywhere. I heard one of them shout, and I felt the blood drain from my face. They had found me. The footsteps echoed ominously through the dimly lit storage room, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. Panic coursed through me as I pressed myself against the wall, trying to blend into the shadows. I had to think quickly. "Where are you hiding, little girl?" one of the gang members called out, his voice mocking. "You can't run forever." I couldn't let them find me. I scanned the landing for anything I could use, something to defend myself. My heart raced as I spotted an old metal pipe lying on the floor. I grabbed it, the cold weight reassuring in my hands. The footsteps grew louder, and I heard the distinct sound of them climbing the stairs. "She's up here." "I can smell her fear," another voice sneered, and my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't let them corner me. I slipped silently to the side of the staircase, crouching low, ready to strike. If they came through that door, I would have to fight with everything I had. The door creaked open, and the first figure stepped into the room, his silhouette framed by the faint light behind him. "Come out," "Come out, wherever you are," he taunted, looking around with a grin. I tightened my grip on the pipe, heart hammering in my chest. This was it. I had to be brave. As he stepped further into the room, I struck, swinging the pipe with all my strength. It connected with his side, and he let out a surprised grunt, stumbling back. I didn't wait to see if he would get back up. I darted past him, adrenaline surging as I headed for the stairs. "Get her!" I heard him yell, the panic in his voice igniting my determination. I sprinted down the stairs, my feet pounding against the wood, the echo of their shouts ringing in my ears. I burst through the door at the bottom, looking for a way out. The room was dark, filled with looming shadows that made it hard to see. I spotted another door at the far end and sprinted toward it, praying it would lead me to freedom. I threw it open, stumbling into a narrow hallway lined with old crates and machinery. "Where did she go?" I heard one of them yell, their voices growing closer. I had no time to think. I sprinted down the hallway, looking for an exit. A flickering light caught my attention at the end, and I dashed toward it, pushing through the door that led outside. I burst into the cool night air, breathing deeply as I took in my surroundings. I was in an industrial area, with dark buildings looming all around me. There were no signs of life, just the distant sounds of the city. I had to keep moving. I turned left, my feet pounding against the pavement as I raced down the street. I glanced over my shoulder, panic bubbling inside me as I expected to see them right behind me. But then I heard the sound of a car engine revving, and my heart sank. I spotted a vehicle speeding toward me, headlights cutting through the darkness. "Help! Please!" I screamed, waving my arms desperately as the car drew closer. To my relief, the car slowed, and the driver, a man in a leather jacket, stared at me, confusion on his face. "Get in," he shouted, and I didn't hesitate. I yanked open the door and dove into the passenger seat, slamming it shut behind me. "Go! They're coming!" I gasped, my heart racing as I glanced back, half expecting to see the gang members closing in. He didn't need to be told twice. The car sped off, tires screeching as we tore away from the scene. I turned to look back, the dim streetlights fading into the distance. "Who were they?" the driver asked, glancing at me with concern. "I don't know," I panted, struggling to catch my breath. "I was just walking in the park, and then they started chasing me. I thought I was going to die." He nodded, his expression serious. "You're safe now. I'm taking you to the police." Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear. What if they had already found out where I was? What if they came after me again? We drove in silence, my mind racing as I replayed the events of the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. As we neared the police station, I spotted flashing lights in the distance, the familiar red and blue illuminating the dark street. "There!" I exclaimed, my heart racing with hope. He pulled up to the curb, and I scrambled out of the car, the fear and adrenaline still coursing through me. I ran toward the entrance, the heavy door swinging open as I burst inside. "Help! I need help!" I shouted, and several officers looked up, their expressions shifting from boredom to concern. "What's going on?" one officer asked, moving toward me. "They were chasing me," I exclaimed, my voice trembling. "A gang! They were going to kill me." The officer nodded, gesturing for me to follow him. "Come with me. We'll take your statement." I followed him into a small interview room, my heart racing as I took a seat at the table. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked, pulling out a notepad. As I recounted the events of the night, my hands shook and I struggled to find the words. I told him everything: the park, the gang, the chase. "Did you see any weapons?" he asked, his voice steady. "No, but they were threatening," I replied, my voice wavering. "They were going to hurt me." He nodded, taking notes as I spoke. "We'll send a unit to investigate. You did the right thing by coming here." Just then, I heard the door swing open, and my heart dropped as I saw the gang members standing at the entrance, eyes glinting with malice. "No!" I screamed, my body freezing in terror. "Let's get her," one of them sneered, stepping forward. Before I could react, the officers jumped into action, rushing to intercept them. "Back away," one shouted, pulling out his weapon. The chaos erupted in an instant, the room filled with shouting and the sound of bodies colliding. I ducked beneath the table, heart pounding as I watched the scene unfold. I couldn't believe they had found me here. This wasn't supposed to happen. I watched as officers restrained the gang members, shouting commands as they cuffed them. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that filled my chest. This wasn't over. Once the commotion settled, an officer helped me up, concern etched across his face. "Are you okay?" he asked, looking me over. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice shaking. "But they won't stop. They'll come for me again." The officer's expression hardened. "We'll protect you. We have your back." As they led the gang members away, I felt a glimmer of hope, a small victory in the midst of the chaos. But deep down, I knew that the nightmare wasn't truly over. Even with the police here, I couldn't shake. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. I was safe, at least for now, but the echoes of the night replayed in my mind like a haunting melody. The officers escorted the gang members away, their faces contorted with rage, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. "Sit tight," one of the officers said, gesturing for me to stay in the small room. "We're going to take your statement, but first, let's get you some water." I nodded, still trying to steady my breathing. My thoughts raced as I replayed every moment, the chase, the fear, the overwhelming sense of helplessness. I thought of the driver who had come to my rescue, a glimmer of kindness in an otherwise dark night. But even that felt like a fleeting illusion, a flicker of light overshadowed by the relentless darkness. The officer returned with a cup of water, and I gratefully took it, sipping slowly. My hands shook, the cold liquid spilling slightly as I tried to steady my nerves. "Thank you," I murmured, but my eyes remained fixed on the door, dreading what might come next. "What's your name?" the officer asked, taking a seat across from me. "Emma," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, Emma. Can you tell me more about what happened tonight?" I recounted the events again, each word dragging me back to the park, to the moment I realized I was being hunted. The officer listened intently, jotting down notes as I spoke. "And you're sure it was a gang?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. "Yes," I replied, my heart racing at the memory. "They were taunting me, and they said they wanted to hurt me." "Do you have any idea why they were after you?" he continued, his tone steady but probing. I shook my head, confusion clouding my mind. "No, I don't know. I was just walking, and then they started chasing me." The officer nodded, his expression serious. "We'll do our best to protect you. But you might need to consider changing your routine, at least for a while. We can provide you with a police escort home if you'd like." Relief washed over me, but it was accompanied by an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. "I don't want to go back there," I admitted, my voice trembling. "What if they come for me again?" "We'll make sure you're safe," he assured me. "For now, we'll keep you here until we can assess the situation." As the night dragged on, the sounds of the police station became a blur around me. Shouts, the ringing of phones, the distant murmurs of officers discussing the ongoing investigation. I felt trapped in a cocoon of fear, the outside world feeling miles away. After what felt like hours, another officer entered the room, his demeanor serious. "Emma, we need to discuss something," he said, gesturing for me to follow him. I glanced at the first officer, who nodded encouragingly. I followed the new officer into a larger room where a group of detectives was gathered, their faces etched with concern. "We've been reviewing surveillance footage from the park and the surrounding area," he said, his tone grave. "Okay," I replied, feeling a knot form in my stomach. He gestured to a screen displaying grainy footage of the park. "We believe we've identified the gang members, but there's something else you need to see." The footage played, showing me walking through the park, oblivious to the danger looming behind me. I felt a pang of dread as I watched the gang members emerge from the shadows, their eyes fixed on me with predatory intent. But then something caught my eye, standing off to the side, a figure that I hadn't noticed before. A man in a dark hoodie, lurking just out of sight. He blended into the shadows, but something about his posture sent chills down my spine. "What is that?" I asked, pointing at the screen. The officer leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "We're not sure. He doesn't seem to be with the gang, but he was watching you. We need to find out who he is." Fear twisted in my stomach. "Is he dangerous?" "We don't know yet," he replied. "But it's something we'll look into. For now, I need you to stay vigilant." As I left the room, dread gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't just from the gang, but something much more insidious lurking in the shadows. I returned to the small room where I had been waiting, my thoughts racing. What did this mean? Was I being targeted for something more? The question loomed over me, filling me with a sense of dread. Hours passed, and the sun began to rise, casting a pale light through the windows. I was exhausted, but sleep eluded me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, the echoes of that night replaying in my mind like a relentless nightmare. "Emma," a voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to see the officer who had been taking my statement. "We've arranged for you to stay with someone until we can ensure your safety." "Stay with someone?" I repeated, confusion flooding my mind. "Yes, a friend of the department. They'll keep an eye on you and will ensure you're protected." I nodded slowly, trying to process the information. "What about the gang?" "They're in custody. We'll have extra patrols in your area, but we can't guarantee they won't try to come after you again." A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I felt a fresh wave of panic. What if they come for me? What if they find me? The officer placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We'll do everything we can to protect you. You're not alone in this." I managed a weak smile, but inside, I felt anything but reassured. The fear clung to me like a second skin, the realization that this could happen again weighing heavily on my heart. As I left the police station with the officer, the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting warm light on the cold pavement. But even with the light, I felt a shadow looming over me, a reminder of the darkness that had unfolded in the park. "Let's get you to safety," the officer said, guiding me toward the car. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. But as I settled into the back seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting, watching. The night had revealed a darkness I had never known existed, and I was terrified it wasn't finished with me yet. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.